Chapter 287. The weather was getting colder and colder. Every household was decorated with lanterns and decorations. At this time, Yuheng's people were actually coming. This made Emperor Gong very surprised. He originally thought that Yuheng's turmoil had just subsided. Even if Kim Yoon wanted to visit, it should be after the new year. However, he came in such a hurry. It was obvious that he attached great importance to the trade between Yuheng and Dayu State. Therefore, when Emperor Gong received the news, he spent 3 days arranging the palace banquet to welcome Yuheng and the others. On this day, it was snowing lightly. However, the entire capital was bustling with noise and excitement. A very luxurious carriage slowly drove into the city. If Gong Yimo was here, she would definitely say that this was the correct way for a monarch to visit. Last time, she forced Longqing Wuji to appear in a low-key and hurried manner. When she went back and thought about it, she would definitely be furious. The city gates were wide open. In addition to the 24 carriages at the front, there were many people following behind. Each of them had outstanding looks. They were wearing luxurious robes and carrying swords. They sat high on the backs of horses. Obviously, they were Kim Yoon's personal attendants. And behind them, there were a total of 129 congratulatory gifts. Each of them was covered with red cloth, forming a long line. At this time, the people suddenly realized their emperor's birthday was coming soon. When the emperor heard that Kim Yoon had gathered such a large number of people, he was a little surprised. Then, he revealed a smile. After all, being respected by the prince of a neighboring country made him proud. He also felt that Kim Yoon must be a humble and courteous person. Because before, it was only a verbal discussion. This time, the meeting represented the real finalization of the cooperation. Therefore, Emperor Gong made a sufficient gesture. He personally led the officials in front of the palace gates to welcome Kim Yoon's arrival. It could be said that he was expressing a grand welcome for Kim Yoon's arrival. At this time, Gong Yimo was in the palace being urged by the palace servants to dress up. Tonight, Emperor Gong would not allow her to be so casual. Gong Che, and the others were in front of the palace gates, standing beside the emperor. At this moment, they watched as Kim Yoon walked down the carriage step by step. Kim Yoon was famous for his good looks. Back then, when he was the #1 beauty in the world, he had to put on makeup and trim his eyebrows. But now, he had power, money, and status in his hands. It could be said that he was only one step away from ascending to the top. Therefore, he was completely different from before, but he was even more outstanding. His sword-like eyebrows reached his temples, and his red lips were bloodthirsty. The magnanimous calmness between his brows made Kim Yoon's appearance even more dazzling. From the moment he stepped down from the carriage, he had firmly grasped everyone's gaze. Gong Cheng was also stunned by the man in front of him. He secretly thought that in terms of appearance, there were many outstanding sons among his sons. At this time, he couldn't help but sigh. After all, this was the world of the young. King Lu Yi had succeeded in his rebellion, the Yuheng monarch had also fallen, and Empress Dowager Yuqi seemed to be having a hard time. Once these young people rose up, they would be unstoppable. Dayu State's monarch greets you. Kim Yoon took the first step to salute. Gong Cheng laughed heartily and helped her up. Why are you acting so distant? Now that the cooperation between the two countries is imminent, if you don't mind, you can call me uncle. I am a few years older than you, so I will call you nephew. His words showed great enthusiasm to Kim Yoon. Kim Yoon slightly hooked his lips and gladly accepted. Thank you, uncle. The two looked at each other and smiled. Kim Yoon was personally led into the imperial palace by Gong Qing. Together, they sat in the imperial carriage and walked towards the main palace. Along the way, They were majestic, but they didn't make much noise. Kim Yoon saw this and had a clear understanding of Dai State's prosperity and the strictness of the system. This was the country where was from. He couldn't help but smile. Gong Ching thought that he was admiring the exquisite atmosphere of Dai State's imperial palace and didn't know that the other party was peeping at his daughter. The palace banquet was completely prepared. When everyone took their seats, the grand and complicated morning music sounded. It was auspicious and luxurious, as if a corner of the golden age had been lifted at this moment. The officials had already arrived. On such a day, they were allowed to bring their families, but they could only sit behind the curtains on both sides. There were 2 rows of seats set up. Of the women present, except for the empress and the 2 concubines, the other women, including the princess, couldn't show their faces. Of course, Gong Yimo was an exception. At the banquet, her seat was set between the crown prince and Gong Dai, representing her status. Now, only 2 people had not arrived. The one who dared to make the emperor and the prince of the neighboring country wait was the empress dowager, who claimed to be ill after the princess was restored and didn't dare to appear again. The other one was the princess of Gu State, who had once stirred up a storm in Yuheng and returned to Dai State and successfully restored her position, Feng Guirong. Gong Dai looked at Kim Yoon, who was sitting on the left side of the emperor, and slightly narrowed his eyes. It was this person who was lucky enough to monopolize the royal sister for nearly 3 years. The banquet was about to begin. At this time, everyone was looking forward to it. For some reason, they wanted to know what would happen when Gong Yimo appeared in front of Kim Yoon again. Those who knew the inside story of Gong Yimo leaving Yuheng smiled and didn't say anything. However, those who didn't know thought that they could watch a good show. Feng Guirong, the princess of Gu State, has arrived. There was a moment of silence. Everyone, including Gong Dai, noticed that the prince of the neighboring country almost hurriedly interrupted his conversation with the emperor and turned his head to look at the door. His action made Gong Ching smile meaningfully. It seemed that he was thinking too much. During those years when was in Yuheng, it was likely that the prince of Xiang had a dream, but the goddess didn't have a heart. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. If a family had a daughter, hundreds of families would want to marry them. His daughter was so outstanding, he was afraid that there would be more people who would want to marry her in the future. Unfortunately, Gong Yimo had already vowed not to marry for the rest of her life. Gong Yimo strode in. For such a formal occasion, she had to wear her court attire. This court attire was specially made later. There were a total of 12 layers, and the main colors were red and black. This was because the emperor found that these 2 colors could best highlight Gong Yimo's bearing. Just like that day at the heaven-seeking platform, she only wore a red dress and a black collar, but she was already better than countless women in the world. Everyone looked at her step by step as she walked closer. The layers of the dress were like piled-up black waves. Each layer was bordered with gold thread, so the layers were distinct. On top of it, there were deep red and light red flowers, and bright red flowers were blooming. It was too beautiful to behold. It was the first time Gong Yimo wore such a headdress on her head. There were a total of 72 pieces of pure gold hair accessories on her head. It looked very domineering, but Gong Yimo's heart was bitter. It was really unbearable. It could be said that it was the first time in her life that she looked like this. Gong Dai suddenly felt that in the future, when they got married, the royal sister's outfit was very good. It was very suitable to wear on the wedding day. Facing everyone's gaze, Gong Yimo walked in with her head held high and her chest puffed out. With every step, a little of the gemstone flowers on her embroidered shoes would be revealed. Under the bright lights, it was dazzling for no reason. In this way, she walked step by step to the front of the hall under everyone's watchful eyes. Such elegance, such bearing, it made all the women envious. Chapter 288. Imperial Father, this subject's son is late. Gong Yimo said with some embarrassment. Emperor Gong couldn't help but glare at her. Originally, Gong Yimo wanted to go with him to the palace gate to welcome the emperor, but she came today wearing a plain cotton dress. Emperor Gong had to take out the clothes prepared for her during the conferring ceremony in advance and forced her to dress up again. Otherwise, it would be so embarrassing. Okay, go sit down. The emperor's tone seemed to be bad, but everyone could feel the doting in his tone. Kim Yoon originally thought that Gong Yimo wouldn't have a good time when she came back, but it seems that he worried too much. Gong Yimo. How could anyone not like her? He stared at Gong Yimo and watched her sit next to the crown prince, diagonally across from him. I haven't seen her for so long. She hasn't changed at all. Feeling Kim Yoon's gaze, Gong Yimo winked at him, which made Kim Yoon laugh involuntarily. That moment of amazement was diluted a lot. No matter how she dressed up, she was still awe. He looked at her deeply. It's only been a while, but he felt like years had passed. When Gong Yimo was by his side, he didn't feel it. Although he knew that Gong Yimo would leave one day, he never thought that it would be so soon. So sudden. These days, when he walked in the mansion without her, he always thought, if he had expressed his feelings earlier, would the result be different? If he had grasped power earlier, if he had noticed the strangeness of his imperial mother, then would Gong Yimo still leave? Really, he obviously had such a good opportunity, but he missed it. When she wasn't in the prince's mansion, it wasn't the home he wanted to go back to every time he went out. Yuheng wasn't Yuheng, it was like a big cage. He couldn't hear a trace of laughter in it. Emperor Gong glanced at Kim Yoon. The loneliness and longing on his face were so obvious that he couldn't help but change the topic. Before the banquet begins, let's get down to business first. Let's drink a few more cups during the celebration later. That way, we'll be able to get rid of one of our worries. Only then did Jin Yoon withdraw his gaze as if he had just woken up from a dream. He no longer looked at her and readily agreed. That is how it should be. Gong Qing laughed and said loudly, send a letter. Chang Shi hurriedly announced, send a letter. The so-called letter of credence was the content of the cooperation between the two countries. This was agreed upon long ago. This time, Kim Yoon came. If there were no problems, as long as he stamped the seal, this matter would be officially finalized. A palace servant stepped forward respectfully and presented the two letters of credence that had been prepared long ago. On the two golden brocades, there were neat words in cinnabar that looked like they were printed. It clearly stated the matters after the two countries started trading, responsibilities, and the regulations that had been discussed together. It was clearly and in detail. Kim Yoon glanced at it and knew that there were no problems. As for the cooperation between the two countries, because Emperor Gong Qing had handed it over to Gong Dai, they had a private discussion and agreement. It didn't appear in the letter of credence. Kim Yoon took out the seal and suddenly smiled. Uncle, when was in Yuheng in the past, every time there was a major decision, she would be the one to stamp it. This time, this little nephew would like to trouble her again. He smiled, but the words that came out of his mouth stunned everyone present. Everyone had a different meaning in his words and each had their own thoughts. But Emperor Gong knew that Kim Yoon wanted to say that his relationship with Gong Yimo was very good, and he only trusted Gong Yimo. So he laughed, what's the harm? Come forward. Gong Yimo was very embarrassed. She didn't expect that Kim Yoon would suddenly mention this matter. As an outsider, participating in politics wasn't something to be proud of. If the emperor misunderstood, the one who would be in trouble would be her. Sigh. Gong Emo sighed, resigned to her fate, and walked straight up. During the process, Kim Yoon looked at her with a smile. The expression in his eyes was deeply hidden, but if one looked carefully, one could see a trace of bitterness. Gong Yimo didn't notice and glared at him fiercely. Really, I haven't seen him for a while, how did he become so strange? Taking the private seal from Kim Yoon, Gong Yimo slightly raised her eyebrows and easily stamped it. At this time, in order to ease Gong Yimo's embarrassment, Emperor Gong suddenly laughed. In that case, this Emperor's dragon seal will also be handed over to you. You will be the witness of this letter of credence. The Emperor's words were equivalent to pushing Gong Yimo to the forefront of a new wave. The Emperor's imperial jade seal, that was something that even the crown prince couldn't easily touch. Behind the curtain, many women exclaimed in surprise. They didn't expect that Gong Yimo, who was also a woman, had the qualifications to use the imperial jade seal in this kind of occasion. This honor was really unprecedented. It could be said that she had achieved the pinnacle of being a woman. Kim Yoon's smile froze for a moment, but soon relaxed. Gong Yimo was at a loss. Holding Kim Yoon's private seal in her hand, she felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. She thought for a moment and simply held Kim Yoon's private seal in one hand and the Emperor's imperial jade seal in the other. Both of her hands stamped on the two identical letters of credence. Since this was the first step to opening the Golden Age, since it was because of her, then it would be decided by her. This scene seemed to have been arranged by the underworld. Everyone witnessed this historical scene. The letter of credence is complete. The eunuch joyfully shouted, and the whole country rejoiced. From today onwards, there would be no more martial law between the people of the two countries. Not only could they trade, they could even marry. However, the necessary national defense would still be in place, and transnational marriage would still be difficult. It was impossible to truly integrate, but the first step of peace had been taken. At least, Yuheng wouldn't be at odds with Daiyu state. This was the greatest political achievement. There were 2 copies of the letters of credence, and both were solemnly kept by the people of the two countries. Emperor Gong was overjoyed and waved his hand loudly. Let the banquet begin. Chang Shi quickly said with a smile. His Majesty has decreed that the banquet shall begin. Several women in palace attire slowly walked out, and the sound of gong music rang out. They all wore light veils and danced, and each of them had a smile on their faces. It was very festive. The palace servants came in line by line, and presented the dishes. The atmosphere became lively, and many people's faces turned red. Today was really a good day. Gong Yimo naturally returned to her seat. She was just about to breathe a sigh of relief and eat something, but she didn't expect that Kim Yoon would not let her go. From the moment Gong Yimo approached him, his heart began to beat faster and faster. He also understood what he wanted the most. Uncle, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. This nephew came here this time to ask for a favor. Emperor Gong was so happy that he didn't guess what he wanted to say. Nephew, there's no harm in saying it. Kim Yoon smiled. At this moment, his whole person was like an extremely dazzling pearl. His beautiful eyes fell on Gong Yimo's body, and his tone was full of tenderness and determination. I want to marry Imo, I hope that uncle will grant my wish. Chapter 289. Gong Cheng stares blankly. At this time, because the palace music is very loud, Gong Cheng might have heard his words. His head that was dizzy with joy just now suddenly straightens up. He thinks for a moment and says seriously. Zhen has a lot of princesses. If nephew wants to marry, it doesn't have to be Mo. Kim Yoon can't help but glance at Gong Yimo. At this time, she is talking to Gong Dai. It seems like they are talking about her interesting story in Yuheng. Her eyes turn into crescents as she smiles. That kind of lively, that kind of lively, why can't he monopolize her? So he smiles and says, perhaps uncle's daughters are all outstanding, but I only want Gong Cheng's face darkens. Kim Yoon quickly says, I know uncle is not at ease with me. You think I have a conspiracy and want to covet the weapon in Immerse's hand. But Immerse said that one day, she will let the Jade Emperor come out. So before that, I can wait. Gong Cheng is shocked. He didn't expect Immerse to have the idea of letting that thing come out. So I only hope that I can set a marriage contract with Immerse. When she hands over the weapon, I will be allowed to marry her home. Kim Yoon lowers his head. Even the purple gold crown on his head is not half as exquisite as his eyebrows. At this time, his expression is sincere and focused, with a hint of caution. If uncle agrees, I, Kim Yoon, swear again that I will only marry her in this life. If there is any violation, I will be abandoned by the gods. Hearing this, Gong Cheng is shocked. He looks him up and down a few times. In the end, he is somewhat emotional. Immerse is really good at reading people. He has to say that if he really wants to marry Immerse, Kim Yoon is indeed a good candidate. He is young and handsome, and also the ruler of a country. He should be at an age where he is arrogant. But now, he is willing to be a concubine and plead with him for Immerse. He is even willing to swear that he will only marry Immerse. He had been the emperor for a long time, so he knew very well how much pressure it was to favor someone, just like concubine Shui. But he couldn't do it, and he was unwilling to do it now. This young man was willing to do it for his daughter. As an outsider, he definitely didn't agree with Kim Yoon's way of doing things, but as a father, he was really gratified. Maybe it was because of the alcohol or something else, but he thought, if Immerse really handed over that thing, why couldn't they get married? Although he was very reluctant, Immerse was very smart and capable. He was unwilling to sacrifice his daughter's happiness for the sake of development. Was there no talent in Dayu State? So he opened his mouth and was about to agree when Gong Ju suddenly stood up. Gong Lik seemed to have stopped for a moment because of this. Even Gong Yimo felt that it was strange. From the beginning, Gong Dai had been looking at the emperor. What did he hear? It couldn't be. It was so noisy that she couldn't hear anything. Emperor Qing glanced at him with some dissatisfaction, but he suddenly thought of something and didn't question him. Instead, he waved at Gong Dai. Gong Ju walked towards him, but his eyes fell coldly on Jin Yun's body, carrying a cold murderous intent. Kim Yoon seemed to feel something and raised his head to look at him. Gong Dai. He knew him, but the hostility on his body made him vigilant. Emperor Qing patted Gong Dai's shoulder and smiled at Kim Yoon. This is my 9th son. Regarding the cooperation with the bank, I have given him full authority. At this time, he added mischievously, he is also the brother that Immerse cares about the most. The two of them have a good relationship. Kim Yoon naturally understood Gong Dai's situation. Perhaps the other party was unhappy with him because he sensed that he was here to steal his sister? When he thought of Gong Dai's position in Gong Yimo's heart, which was equivalent to his brother-in-law, his attitude was modest and he gently smiled. In Yuheng, Immerse often mentioned him. Now that I've seen him today, his appearance is indeed outstanding and his talent is shocking. He really admired Gong Dai because he opened the bank under Immerse's proposal. But what about Gong Dai? At that time, he was still so young, but he was able to seize the opportunity quickly and set up a bank in Dayu State. He was really young and promising. His elder's attitude deeply stimulated Gong Dai. Wasn't he just 7 or 8 years older than him? What qualifications did he have? He coldly smiled. Imperial father, what were you talking about just now? You seem to be very happy. In front of Gong Dai, Emperor Qing didn't intend to hide anything. He said, Prince Yuheng wants to marry Immerse. His sincerity has moved Imperial Father. Ha ha ha. A trace of coldness flashed through Gong Dai's cold eyes. But Royal Sister has already vowed not to marry in this life. Imperial Father, do you want to go back on your words? Hearing his words, Emperor Chang's face gradually turned ugly. If Immerse handed over the weapon, why can't she marry? If he granted the marriage, what would others dare to say? Kim Yoon was a bit stunned. Immerse vowed not to marry in this life. Without waiting for Emperor Qing to force him to say something irrevocable, Gong Dai lightly said. Moreover, this matter is related to Royal Sister's life. For the sake of Royal Sister wholeheartedly serving Daiyu State, shouldn't Imperial Father ask for Royal Sister's opinion? With a few words, he suddenly changed the dominant position, making Kim Yoon nervous. Immerse, will she be willing to marry him? Emperor Qing also felt that Gong Dai's words were reasonable. But he, who was used to being tyrannical, almost forgot to ask for Immerse's opinion. So he smiled at Kim Yoon. That's also reasonable. Since nephew has the heart, I also have to ask Immerse's opinion. Nephew, please wait a few more days. I will give you an answer. Kim Yoon secretly hated Gong Dai for messing up the situation, but at this time, he couldn't say anything and quickly agreed. But when he looked at Gong Dai again, his eyes showed a touch of vigilance. It seems that if he wants to marry Immerse, he really has to go through this brother-in-law. If Gong Dai knew that he secretly called him brother-in-law, he's afraid that he won't be able to restrain himself from crippling him. From a moment ago, he felt that Kim Yoon's eyes were strange when he looked at Royal Sister, so he paid attention to the shape of his lips when he spoke and replayed the conversation between him and the Emperor in his heart. When he saw that the Emperor was so proud of his words that he almost agreed to it, he finally couldn't help but stand up. Fortunately, the Emperor was still rational and was persuaded back by him. Otherwise, if Royal Sister suddenly got engaged and had a fiancé, it would really make him crazy. Just thinking of this, he looked at Kim Yoon even more sternly. Royal Sister is his. She was his when she was 7 years old, and he didn't allow anyone to spy on her. As for Royal Sister preparing to hand over that thing one day. When Gong Dai returned to his seat, his whole body was cold because Royal Sister had never mentioned this to him. At this time, Gong Yimo felt that Gong Dai was acting strangely and asked carefully. What's wrong? Gong Dai turned to look at her, and suddenly, he smiled. Why was this smile so scary? Gong Yimo couldn't help but want to retreat, but Gong Dai grabbed her hand from under the table, tightly. Royal Sister, do you like Kim Yoon? Chapter 290. Gong Yimo was stunned for a moment, then she smiled and said, how is that possible? Although Kim Yoon was very attentive and beautiful, just like the brother next door, only the heavens knew that she had never even touched his hand when she was in Yuheng. Moreover, Kim Yoon was also a gentleman and had never done anything that crossed the line with her. Why did Gong Dai suddenly ask about this? Hearing Gong Yimo's unhesitant answer, Gong Dai couldn't help but smile. Unlike the aggressive and threatening smile from before, this time, his smile was as clear as the wind and clear as the moon, but with a trace of joy and affection. Under the table, his hand gently traced the outline of Gong Yimo's palm as he spoke in a low voice. Kim Yoon said that he likes you and wants to marry you. That's impossible. Gong Yimo said without even thinking. After all, she had asked Kim Yoon this question no less than 3 times, and he had always said that he didn't like her, so she had always been at ease and treated him as an older brother. Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. Just now, Imperial Father almost agreed, Royal Sister. If you can't do it because you're close to Kim Yoon, I'm very willing to do it for you. He was serious when he said this. If it wasn't for the fact that Gong Yimo didn't like other people interfering with her matters without her consent, he really wanted to immediately chase Kim Yoon back to Yuhing and never see him again. Gong Yimo smiled and waved her hand. You must have misheard. But when she saw Gong Dai's cold expression and saw that he didn't seem to be joking, she swallowed and said, You, don't interfere, I can handle it myself. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and smiled. That'd better be the case. He was really willing to make a move. However, if he made a move, what would happen to Kim Yoon? What would happen to him? How would he feel when he returned? Those were not within the scope of his consideration. Seeing Gong Yimo and Gong Dai chatting happily, the wine glass in Gong Che's hand almost shattered. At this moment, he turned his head and said to Gong Yimo as if he had thought of something. Speaking of the Grand Canal conferring ceremony, Imperial Father intends to make you the saintess to pray for the blessings of the world. Gong Yimo turned around to hear this and immediately felt a headache coming on. Can't you just find any woman? Imperial Father has so many daughters, why do you have to choose me? She adjusted the crown on her head. Fortunately, her hair was thick and long. Otherwise, she would have to wear a wig to fit so many hairpins. Just by looking at her expression, he could tell what she was thinking. Gong Che's heart warmed and he couldn't help but smile. Oh, this is an honor that others can't even dream of. You're actually trying to push it away. Gong Yimo pursed her lips. This was the bad thing about the ancients. They always wanted to hold a ceremony for everything and announce it to the world. You were the one who named the Grand Canal. Therefore, only you are the most suitable person to do this. Gong Che's eyes were filled with adoration as he spoke. Gong Yimo nodded. Forget it. I only hope that Imperial Father can simplify the ceremony on account of my hard work day and night, she pouted slightly. Because that was simply impossible. Gong Dai listened to their conversation but didn't say anything. He only focused on playing with Gong Yimo's fingers under the table. If he wanted to be the royal sister's man, he couldn't hold her too tightly. If he held her too tightly, she would want to escape. But he couldn't let her go too easily either. If he let her go, she would return to her original state and focus on being a coward. He was really vexed. His royal sister was so difficult to handle. It could be said that she was the biggest problem he had ever faced in his life. The banquet ended in this extremely harmonious atmosphere. When Gong Yimo was about to leave the palace, she was stopped by the Empress. The Empress was probably looking for her as an excuse. The main point was that she probably wanted to ask for her opinion. After all, this wasn't a small matter. Sure enough, on the way back to the bedroom, the Empress asked about it. What do you think of second Prince Yuhing? The two walked in front and the palace servants followed behind them from a distance. It was obvious that they didn't dare to disturb them. Brother Kim Yoon, he's very good. Gong Yimo smiled. The Empress was delighted, but before she could persuade her, she said again. It's just that I treat him as my brother. If it's any other relationship, it's impossible. The Empress' face stiffened. It's just a joke to say that you won't marry for the rest of your life. Don't take it seriously. Gong Yimo said lightly, since I said it, it's a promise. Although I'm a woman of my words. The Empress sighed. She couldn't say more. After all, she wasn't her own flesh and blood. Now she could only hope that her son had really given up. As for the rest, she really couldn't care less. After sending the Empress to Fengqi Palace, Gong Yimo prepared to go to Taiji Palace. After all, that place was bestowed to her. It was already so late and she didn't want to leave the palace. After sending away the palace servants who were leading the way, she walked alone on the road to Taiji Palace. In fact, Kim Yoon's matter had touched her. Thinking back to the day when she left, Kim Yoon danced for her for the first time. She seemed to have vaguely sensed something at that time. But after she left, she didn't think about it anymore. Did he really like her, or did he value her ability and want her to be used by him like before? Unknowingly, she walked to a waterside pavilion. A trace of cold water vapor hit her in the face, clearing her mind. She sat down by the waterside pavilion and carefully thought about the problem that had been troubling her for a while. She couldn't accept Gong Dai's feelings. She hadn't solved it yet, and now, there was another Kim Yoon. Are you unhappy? The sudden voice gave Gong Yimo a fright. She was too engrossed and didn't notice that someone had come. She suddenly turned around and saw Kim Yoon. At this time, he seemed to have freshened up. He was wearing a moon-white robe and his hair was loose. Standing in front of her, he really looked like a female ghost. Gong Yimo couldn't help but laugh. But this ghost was really stunning. Kim Yoon saw her laugh and couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He thought that she would be unhappy after Gong Dai told her. He didn't expect that she didn't show an expression of rejection. Then, did it mean that he had a chance? Kim Yoon's heart thumped. He sat beside Gong Yimo with a serious expression. It was Gong Yimo who spoke first. It's not that I'm unhappy. I just want to sit here for a while and think about life. Then what are you thinking about? Kim Yoon felt that she was by his side. This feeling was as if he had returned to the prince's residence. It made him feel relaxed and happy for no reason. Gong Yimo blinked. I'm thinking about you. Kim Yoon was stunned. At that moment, his face turned red. Although it couldn't be seen clearly in the night, but his sudden chaotic breathing made Gong Yimo sigh. Do you really like me? Her question was so straightforward that it was impossible to resist. Kim Yoon tried to figure out her expression and nodded lightly. Gong Yimo became even more depressed. But I've asked you this question many times. Why didn't you say it before? Chapter 291. Her words made Kim Yoon slightly dazed. He seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and smiled bitterly. Because I wasn't good enough for you at that time, so, Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows. Why would you have such thoughts? Then she felt that this sentence was not right and said, what I mean is, why would you feel inferior? Is it the same for everyone? Could this be the truth behind why Kim Yoon hadn't married for so long? Kim Yoon recalled the past and smiled faintly. It's not the same for everyone, but for you, it's the same. Gong Yimo was speechless. She didn't know why he would think that. Kim Yoon looked deeply at her and said softly, you know, since I was young. I had a hard time and was very depressed. But I was also very conceited. My royal brothers couldn't memorize the texts for many days, but I could memorize them in one day. Moreover, they were often troubled by the grand tutor, but I was able to draw inferences. Speaking of this, his lips curled into a smile, but it was a bitter smile. Perhaps it was because I didn't know how to restrain myself when I was young, so they complained to me and I couldn't study at a young age. Although I wanted to, I couldn't go against Imperial Father's orders. Now, I can only read. I really don't know anything about poetry and songs. Gong Yimo felt sorry for him for no reason. Perhaps this was the process that beautiful Jade had to go through. He frowned slightly. At that time, I didn't understand. I was smart, hardworking, and motivated. In terms of appearance and character, I was better than my brothers. Why didn't Imperial Father trust me and even doubt my birth? Could it be that I didn't deserve those praises? Why couldn't they see my good points and only blame me for my mistakes and call me a bastard? So I gradually felt inferior. This inferiority may have been deeply rooted. Later on, When I was cross-dressing and dancing, I actually felt satisfied when I heard the exclamations of the people around me. I wanted to be praised by the world and receive their affirmation. Perhaps I'm already beyond saving. Back when I was in Yuheng, I had already achieved so much. My brothers could no longer stop me. But when I faced you, I still felt inferior. When I faced power, I still didn't dare to take that step. But after you left, I easily obtained Yuheng's imperial power. Only then did I realize how close I was to these things, just like you back then. He suddenly reached out and gently covered the back of Gong Yimo's hand. Gong Yimo raised her head and looked at him. Her beautiful eyes seemed to be shining. Even the mole under her eye was full of charm. It was breathtaking. You're very good to me. You're beautiful and talented. Just like the blazing sun, anyone who was by your side would receive unlimited power. And I'm like a stalk of grass, a flower. You let me grow, but I want to have you. What a delusion. This idea is laughable, but that's what I thought back then. I knew that you would leave one day, but I couldn't even say the words to make you stay. I didn't dare to admit my feelings for you. So when you asked me, my friends asked me, and even my mother asked me, I would tell them that I don't like you. But every time, I would shout crazily in my heart that it was all fake. I like you. I've liked you for a long, long time. His words suddenly made Gong Yimo feel as if she had been burned by fire. She quickly retracted her hand. You think too highly of me. I'm not as noble as you think. Kim Yoon smiled. What's the matter? Your kindness to me is like giving me a new life. I didn't dare to say it before because I didn't have the right. But now, I have the power in my hands. He raised his voice a little. That faint domineering aura was something that Kim Yoon didn't have in the past. He was the kind of person who would only get what he got. For example, if he had enough money, he would become very magnanimous. If he had enough power, he would become very domineering. And now, Kim Yoon was moving towards the latter. She had never expected that Jin Yoon would undergo such a huge change, and it was all because of her. She didn't know that after she left, Kim Yoon's mood was so irritable that even his mother didn't dare to approach him. He suppressed his madness, but couldn't put it into practice. That was why there was a qualitative change now. Gong Yimo's face was tense as she said, maybe it's because I helped you, so you've developed a dependence on me. This isn't love. In my heart, I've always treated you as an older brother. There's no such thing as love between a man and a woman. Her words made Kim Yoon's pupils shrink. Actually, at that time, he had always thought about what to do if Imo rejected him after he expressed his feelings. At that time, when he thought of this result, he felt ashamed and absent-minded. It was hard for him to accept it. But now, other than his heartache, he felt even more unconvinced. He already had so much. He was already above others. Why was it that others could have it, but he couldn't? So he once again grabbed Gong Yimo and asked in a deep voice. Am I not good? What do you not like about me? I'll change, okay? His voice gradually lowered. You can't imagine what kind of life I've been living. The prince's residence used to be the place I looked forward to the most. But without you, there wasn't a trace of life there. When I failed, it was you who encouraged me. When I was hurt, it was you who saved me. When I was in trouble, it was you who pointed the way. In the past 3 years, my life has been filled with your shadow. Why are you so cruel to me? If you can't belong to me, why did you let me meet you? His words were sorrowful. Gong Yimo couldn't answer his words at all. But at this moment, a murderous aura suddenly appeared. Gong Yimo quickly pushed Kim Yoon away. On the ground, there was a thin withered branch that was trembling slightly. It fiercely stabbed into the stone floor. If Gong Yimo had been a little later, this withered branch would have pierced through Kim Yoon's hand. Who? Kim Yoon's expression turned cold. He looked up. At this moment, his whole body was surrounded by danger and evil aura. He was really different from the previous him. Gong Dai walked out from the shadows. His dark black robes blended into the night. His white face and black jade-like eyes appeared cold and cheerless under the moonlight. But when those cold and cheerless eyes landed on Jin Yun, they carried a murderous intent. Gong Yimo was a little ashamed. Didn't he go back? Why was he still in the palace? And to be caught red-handed at this time, she felt embarrassed just thinking about it. At this moment, Gong Dai walked step by step to Gong Yimo's side. At this moment, she was still wearing her brocade robes. The black and red palace dress and Gong Dai's black robes complemented each other, as if they were a match made in heaven. Kim Yoon didn't sense the danger and narrowed his eyes. Prince Chi, is it? Why did you suddenly attack me? Is this how Dai State treats its guests? But when Gong Dai heard this, he didn't even look at him. He only looked quietly at Gong Yimo. Then, he lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. Kim Yoon's eyes suddenly widened. Gong Dai's voice was like ice. Because you violated a taboo. She is my woman. Chapter 292. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo was shocked by his words, but it wasn't only Gong Yimo who was shocked. Kim Yoon was too. He took a step back. Kim Yoon couldn't accept the scene before him. He didn't expect Gong Dai to like Gong Yimo. Weren't they brother and sister? Even Gong Yimo felt awkward. Although she knew very well that she wasn't related to Gong Dai by blood, outsiders didn't know. They looked at them with shock. Despicable. Thinking of this, she took a few steps back. In the corridor of the waterside pavilion, the three of them stood in a triangular formation. Their expressions were grave. Impossible. Did he force you? Come with me. The Dai State's palace looked clean, but the interior was the same as Yuhing's in the past. Kim Yoon hurriedly grabbed Gong Yimo's hand, but Gong Dai was faster. He pulled Gong Yimo into his arms and sneered at Kim Yoon. I'll say it again. Mo is mine. He rested his chin on Gong Yimo's head. And you don't belong to the Dai State. You don't have the right to interfere in our matters. No. Impossible, Don't tell me you like him. Kim Yoon's face turned pale. He couldn't believe it. Gong Yimo wanted to resist, but Gong Dai held her firmly in his arms. It's me who likes her. Gong Dai said coldly, you said that Mo saved you, but she also saved me. She was even willing to give up her life for me. You said that Mo helped you, but she also helped me because she said that I was the most important person to her. You said that Mo accompanied you for 3 years. It was cruel for her to leave you, but she has been by my side since I was 6 years old. Gong Dai had never said such a long speech to an outsider, but every word came from the bottom of his heart. At this moment, he sneered and asked, if it's cruel for God to take her away from you, then what about me? His voice was calm and cold. If Kim Yoon had to have her for 3 years, then what about him? If Gong Yimo left him, what would he do? He would go crazy. He would kill everyone. He would become what Gong Yimo was afraid of. He would become what he was in his previous life. But your siblings. Jin Yun's lips instantly lost their color. It was as if these words had exhausted all of his strength. Gong Emo wanted to move, but Gong Ju held her tightly. So what? Mo, she likes me. Gong Yimo's eyes widened. Just as she was about to speak, Gong Dai pressed hard on her chest, blocking her words. Kim Yoon saw that Gong Yimo didn't refute, and he couldn't stand still. He had thought that he would lose, but he never thought that he would lose to someone he thought was his brother-in-law. There was no reason for this. Mo, have you forgotten what you said before? Kim Yoon suddenly said, you said that you were afraid that the world wouldn't like you and hate you. But what are you doing now? Aren't you afraid? Gong Yimo trembled when she heard this. The hatred in the eyes of those people in her previous life was still vivid in her mind. She was afraid. She was still afraid. Gong Dai felt her emotions almost instantly. He hugged her tightly, just like how she hugged him in the cold palace. I won't let anyone have the chance to hurt her. You don't have to worry about this. His words were like a sharp knife, causing Jin Yoon to feel a stabbing pain. But the two people in front of him were like one. He couldn't get in between them. This feeling of difference made him take 2 steps back. Then, he suddenly turned around and left. It shouldn't be like this. In Yuheng, he was the one that Mo, paid the most attention to. It shouldn't be like this. After he left, Gong Yimo couldn't hold it in anymore. She silently pushed Gong Dai away. Feeling that she was angry, Gong Dai didn't force her and let go of her. You heard it too. Gong Yimo raised her head and said. At this time, the golden crown on her head reflected a cold light with her movements, making Gong Dai's heart sink. She pursed her lips and continued. There's a huge chasm between the two of us. Previously, I was pressured by you to the point that I couldn't calm down. But now, I've thought it through. In this life, I still want to walk this path alone. Her voice was very low, but every word reached Gong Dai's ears. A person might be lonely and long, but she would have to bear a lot less. She wouldn't have to worry about being despised by the world when she was with Gong Dai. She wouldn't have to worry about being used by his enemies to attack him. She also wouldn't have to worry about being with him and being afraid that he would have a change of heart. Liking someone was really too scary. Sometimes, when you lost your heart, you would no longer be yourself. Moreover, even if she and Gong Dai were in a secret relationship, would Gong Dai still not marry? When the time came, would she have to share him with other women and then worry about personal gains and losses? It was too scary and too tiring. She might as well give up from the beginning. Gong Dai didn't seem to be agitated. He was even smiling. It was as if Gong Yimo wasn't calmly drawing a line with him just now. Instead, she was throwing a tantrum with him in the heat of the moment. You want to leave me? Gong Dai asked softly. It's as if you're using me to make Kim Yoon give up. What do you want to do? Make me give up? Gong Yimo couldn't answer this question. How could Gong Dai give up? Mary. Don't think about it. Gong Dai seemed to be able to guess her thoughts. He spoke quickly and calmly. I'll kill whoever you marry. Even if you marry overseas, I'll start a war and snatch you back. When the time comes, you'll either kill me on the battlefield or be snatched back by me and become my exclusive pet. Why should I? Gong Yimo was furious. She glared at him. Because I love you to the core. But this was even harder for Gong Yimo to accept. That's your business. I don't owe you anything. Why are you doing this to me? Can't you be obedient for once? Isn't it good to be like before? Her life started from the day she opened her eyes. It started from the moment she chose to curry favor with the emperor and become a princess. She thought that she would be involved with the Gong family. She didn't take revenge because they hadn't done anything to her. But that didn't mean that she owed them anything. She had to sell it to them. She yelled at him, but Gong Ju remained quiet and calm. His picturesque eyebrows stared at her intently, making her anger seem unreasonable. Gong Yimo suddenly felt wronged. In the next moment, tears welled up in her eyes. She knew that she was being unreasonable, but she just couldn't bear it. She squatted down and forcefully removed the golden hairpins on her head and threw them on the ground. "You're doing this on purpose. You're deliberately bullying me. I already said that I hate this set of headwear. Why do you still want me to wear it?" Chapter 293. Her movements were very forceful. Seeing that her hair bun was in a mess, Gong Dai squatted down and grabbed her hand in time. Then, he personally removed her hairpin. His movements were so light and gentle. It was like he was a completely different person compared to when he was facing Kim Yoon. Gong Yimo looked at him with red eyes. Large pieces of clothing were spread out on the ground. She was like a little rabbit in luxurious clothes, waiting to bite someone. Gong Dai smiled. He gently removed the jewelry on her head. The process did not hurt her at all. Although the two of them were squatting together, there was still some distance between them. "Royal sister, do you think that you're very pitiful to encounter such a thing?" He removed a hair ornament from her head. His expression was as cold as water, and there was a faint smile on his face. "I also think that I'm very pitiful." Gong Yimo calmed down and choked out, "How are you pitiful?" She was clearly the one who was troubled, all right. Her originally good life suddenly had so many emotional entanglements, and it was the love entanglements that she was most afraid of. What did she say? Gong Dai chuckled. "I'm not pitiful now. Although I lost my mother when I was very young and was banished to the cold palace, during that time, there were people who wanted to kill me every day. However, I met you." His fingertips lightly brushed through her hair. His gaze stopped on her hair bun, as if he was saying something unimportant. "You might not know. When I was young, I hated everyone. Every time I survived after being ruthlessly tortured, I would clean my wounds while thinking about how I would kill those people when I grew up. At that time, hatred was the only thing that kept me going." When he said this, he smiled faintly. "You might not know, but the punishments in Zhao prison that make people pale when they hear them was something I thought of when I was young. At that time, I thought that not only would I slowly kill the people who hurt me, those masterminds and accomplices behind the scenes, I would not let a single one of them off." After removing the hairpin on the right, Gong Dai moved to the left and gently and carefully removed the hairpin on the left for her. Some of the hairpins got caught in her hair when she pulled them just now. He would also gently smooth out her hair as if he was treating a rare treasure, without any impatience. "And those palace servants in the cold palace. Those people didn't hurt me, but I was a prince and their master. However, when someone tried to harm me, they didn't help me because of their cowardice. So, I have to kill them too." Gong Yimo's heart was originally very sad and distressed, but after hearing what he said, she calmed down instead. She remembered his careful and vigilant eyes when they first met. She never thought that he would have such a mental journey. She also didn't know that he was so bloodthirsty at such a young age. No wonder in her previous life, when he gained power, the first thing he did was to wash the palace with blood. At that time, even Su Miaolan couldn't stop him. Gong Dai continued, "But you see, after I came out of the cold palace, I was so obedient. I wholeheartedly studied. Whether it was Lu Xianfei, Gue Fei, or those who betrayed me in the cold palace, I didn't take revenge on any of them. Do you know why?" After removing all the hairpins, he stopped and suddenly looked at her quietly. "Why? Gong Yimo's eyes were still red. She squatted on the ground obediently like a small ball, making Gong Dai want to kiss her and hug her again. His fair fingertips sank into her fine black hair. First, you don't like it. Gong Dai reached out to remove the largest golden crown on her head. His chin was slightly raised, and he gently smiled. You don't like it when I kill people over small matters. You always said that when you don't cross the bottom line, it's better to have the strength to argue with those people than to strengthen yourself. At that time, when I made a move on Lucien Fei or Gue Fei, I was afraid that I didn't do a clean job and implicated you, so I was very obedient for 2 years. Gong Yimo nodded, but that was because she didn't know. If she knew that Gong Dai had so much resentment in his heart, even if he didn't want to take revenge, she would have taught them a lesson. Anger in the heart can't be suppressed, it will make a child twisted. There's another reason, it's also because of you. Gong Yimo stared at him with wide eyes. At this moment, Gong Dai's smile was extremely gentle. The waterside corridor was quiet at this time. The faint moonlight cast down, illuminating Gong Dai's face. Because of you, I am very satisfied. Gong Yimo was stunned. Sometimes, I think that the reason why I suffered and was humiliated in the past was all because you were going to come to my side. Gong Yimo looked up in confusion, but she met his eyes. Cold, clear, black and white, but it was full of her reflection. In this world, there's no woman more beautiful, more excellent, and more kind-hearted than you. But you came to my world and pulled me from the darkness to the light. You cared for me, took care of me, and taught me how to read and write. After leaving the cold palace, the first thing you did was to do business with grandfather. I often saw you very tired, lying on the table and sleeping. When I asked you, was money important? You said that you were earning a lot of money now, so I would have something to rely on in the future. So, I, who hated to look at accounts, seriously studied it for more than a month and began to take over these businesses. You saw that my career was not going well, so you wanted father to put me in an important position. But you were afraid that I would be sent to an unfamiliar place and be persecuted. So, you studied the geography of the West Continent and thought of ways to send me to grandfather, so that I would be safe and also be able to perform meritorious deeds. At this time, there was a soft click. Gong Dai opened the crown on Gong Yimo's head, held it up with both hands, and then flung it back. All of Gong Yimo's fine black hair was released in an instant, sliding in a beautiful arc in the night sky before it all fell down. Look at you, not only did you give me care, hope, and talent, you also gave me everything that a man in this world wants to have. Monstrous wealth, shocking power. You always said that you wanted to give the best in this world to me. But with you like this, what right do I have to take revenge and complain about the past? He put the golden crown on the ground and held Gong Yimo's face with both hands. At this time, she seemed to be in a daze. Her eyes were wide open, and she had long forgotten that she was angry and angry. His eyes seemed to contain starlight and endless gentleness. Having you, I am the happiest person in this world. But if you only give me wealth and status, but not your feelings, then I would rather not have met you in the first place. Perhaps darkness, pain, struggle, and distortion, but it is better than having you and then losing you. That will only make me crazy, make me remember all of my hatred, and become the person I was before I met you. But now you want to do that. Tell me, am I not very pitiful? Chapter 294. Gong Yimo looked at him and was rendered speechless by his glib tongue. Gong Dai's learning ability was really fast. When Kim Yoon talked to her, he talked to her. When Kim Yoon confessed, he confessed as well. What's more, he said it better than Kim Yoon. Seeing that she didn't say anything, Gong Dai obviously didn't want to let her off. Royal sister, you haven't said whether I'm pitiful or miserable. Gong Yimo could even hear the laughter in his tone, which made her want to laugh too, but she couldn't laugh. Really? Why was Gong Dai always able to grasp her weakness? She clearly clearly wanted to draw a line between them. With that thought, she felt that she couldn't stay any longer and got up. But she had been squatting for too long, so she got up too suddenly and her legs went numb. Her body swayed, and Gong Dai hurriedly supported her. Gong Yimo was resentful. Why didn't Gong Dai's legs go numb? Gong Dai held Gong Yimo's waist with both hands and laughed. Royal sister, you're running away. What am I running away from? Gong Yimo didn't dare to look at him. Her voice was loud, but she was weak inside. Gong Dai's expression calmed down as he said softly. Royal sister, you're running away from your responsibility. Yes, you've given me a lot, but if you don't give yourself to me, I'd rather you had never given me anything. Gong Yimo fell silent. If she could go back in time, she might still save Gong Dai, but would she still put in so much effort? But since you've already given, Gong Dai lowered his head and bit her ear. Then take responsibility until the end. He was crazy. Gong Yimo felt that there was something wrong with this person's logic. Shouldn't it be that since you've given me so much, I'd be embarrassed to ask you for more? Why is it that since you've given me so much, it's your fault if you don't give me your entire being? She glared at Gong Dai angrily. You're twisting logic. No, you're being unreasonable. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. With that, she lifted her skirt, turned around, and ran away. How could he not run? According to past experience, if she didn't run now, she would be taken advantage of. Looking at her back as she left, Gong Dai smiled, but he was secretly sad. He squatted down again and used his coat to pick up all the jewelry on the ground. He was very careful with every piece he picked up. The royal sister looked beautiful in them, but they were too heavy. He had to modify them so that she might be able to use them during the conferring ceremony. Days passed. Kim Yoon and Gong Dai still had to discuss their cooperation, but she didn't know how they discussed it. There was no news from them these few days. As for Gong Che, who was in charge of the conferring ceremony, he hadn't appeared for a few days. Gong Yimo inexplicably heaved a sigh of relief. She nestled in Taiji Palace to read and enjoy her relaxing time. However, she was destined to be busy. Because little Princess Lu Yi, who was supposed to arrive after the conferring ceremony, had actually arrived today. Could it be that the moment her imperial brother left, she followed right behind him? She had to admit that she knew the truth. Regarding the little princess, Gong Yimo's heart was still a little uncomfortable. Because in her previous life, Gong Yimo clearly knew how capable this little princess was. She actively advocated for war and wanted to take advantage of Gong Yimo when she was dealing with the internal strife. She even personally took command. In the end, Gong Yimo couldn't take it anymore. In a fit of anger, she directly handed the country over to Gong Dai and dispatched the main army to fight against Liu Ye's army. In the end, she even fought back. That little princess also became a captive. In order to survive, the little princess actually betrayed her own brother and parents who had always doted on her. Gong Yimo wasn't a saint. She didn't sympathize with the other party who started the fight and lost. Moreover, since the fight was already fought, she might as well wipe them all out. Therefore, no matter how despicable the other party's betrayal of their parents was, as long as she could prevent a few of her brothers from dying, she didn't mind taking a shortcut. Therefore, the wise King Liu Yi fell into the hands of his own sister in the end. In the end, he died with his eyes wide open. However, if it wasn't for his parents' indulgence and trust, he wouldn't have ended up like this. Such a flexible, scheming, and ruthless woman was going to marry Gong Dai. She clearly married Hua Zhou Wu Yu's brother in her previous life. Why was it different in this life? The other party would probably arrive in the evening. However, the emperor valued her very much. Moreover, his sons were all busy now. Therefore, he could only send Gong Yimo to pick her up. He thought that since they were all girls, perhaps there would be something to talk about. No matter how unwilling Gong Yimo was, she still went. In any case, she would have to meet sooner or later. She wasn't someone who would run away. However, when she went out, she saw that the sky was gloomy. It seemed that even the heavens could feel the resentment in her heart. It was Gong Yimo's first time officially picking someone up. Moreover, her personal sedan chair was carried by 24 golden bearers on the day of the coronation ceremony. In this way, it seemed that the other party was travel-worn, which was a little bad. However, Gong Yimo's gloomy mood immediately turned bright. She happily jumped onto the sedan chair. That little princess's face changed when she was unhappy. It was fun. She wanted to go and provoke her. "Princess, the capital is in front," the maidservant respectfully said. She had many small braids and was wearing agate and other accessories. She looked very exotic. At this moment, a corner of the carriage was lifted, revealing a beautiful woman with deep facial features. Her eyes were not the color of gemstones like her brother's. Instead, they were amber. Her nose was very high and her face was very thin. Although she was good-looking, her cheekbones were a little high. She gave off a somewhat harsh and heartless feeling. Her lips were also thin. At this moment, she raised her eyes and glanced at it. This was the Daiyu state. Compared to Lu Yi, it was much more imposing and orderly. However, where was the person picking her up? Shouldn't he be waiting at Shirley Pavilion outside the city? At this moment, she was almost there. Why couldn't she see anyone? However, when she thought that the person picking her up was most likely Gong Dai, she didn't have a trace of anger. Instead, she faintly smiled. Perhaps Gong Dai himself didn't know that this little princess had seen him before. At that time, she knew that Shizhou was building a project called the Well Canal. In order to gain merit, she took a risk and sneaked into Shizhou to investigate. That was the first time she saw Gong Dai. At that time, she was still young. Gong Dai was also young. However, his appearance was exquisite. His indifferent and cold aura was especially eye-catching. With just one glance, she felt as if there was a certain emotion beating in her heart. It was hard to forget. It wasn't until later that she found out about the use of the Well Canal. This wonderful idea was single-handedly planned by Gong Dai. In her heart, she yearned for him even more. Such a capable, talented, and beautiful man was much better than those boors like Lu Yi who only knew how to pursue power. Later, even after she returned to Lu Yi, she had always been paying attention to Gong Dai's news. She discovered that he had created countless legends since his arrival. There was no one in Shizhou who didn't like him. Their love for him grew deeper and deeper. Therefore, this time, before her imperial brother went to Daiyu State, he said that he wanted to cooperate with Daiyu State through marriage. She volunteered to marry far away. Moreover, she came right after her imperial brother left. She already knew that as long as she came to Daiyu State, Gong Dai would be the most suitable choice for her. She believed that Gong Qing would do the same. As for his shameless sister. Chapter 295. The little princess furrowed her brows. Women were much more sensitive than men. When she found out about Gong Dai's past, she already felt that there was something wrong with this pair of siblings. Later, her brother's investigation further proved this point. Hence, Gong Yimo was also someone she wanted to deal with this time. She really didn't know what kind of woman could be so shameless that she wouldn't even let her own brother off. She curled her lips into a cold smile. Seeing the long procession, the soldiers guarding the city knew that Lu Ye's princess had arrived. They hurriedly went to inform Gong Yimo. This time, Lu Yi had given enough capital to marry off his sister. Even if the journey was arduous, 10 miles of red dowry was not a joke. Gong Yimo was currently in the city and had already slept. When she heard that someone had arrived, she stretched lazily. After a while, Lu Ye's people entered the city. Lu Ye's envoy dismounted first. When he saw Gong Yimo's carriage, he hurriedly came forward to pay his respects. In the procession, Lu Ye's little princess lifted the curtain to take a look. With just one glance, that grand and luxurious 24 golden lotus carriage immediately occupied her eyes. Compared to the other party, her small carriage was simply too shabby. At this moment, Lu Ye's envoy, Buji, was sitting by the side of the carriage, bowing and chatting with a smile. The neat rows of imperial guards behind the carriage made the little princess blush. Who didn't know that Gong Dai was the leader of the imperial guards in Daiyu state? And now, it was indeed Gong Dai who had come to fetch her. It seemed that the monarch of Daiyu state also approved of this marriage. Soon, Buji returned. He smiled at his princess and said, "Princess, quickly go and greet him. He's a big shot." Buji didn't know what his little princess was thinking, but he still understood Gong Yimo very well. He also admired her. Now that he knew that Gong Yimo had personally come to fetch him, he was overwhelmed by the favor. The little princess pursed her lips and smiled. Then, she was helped down from the carriage. At this time, there were not many people at the city gate, but there were still many commoners watching the show. However, Lu Ye's woman did not care about trifles, and there was no saying that she could not show her face in public. Therefore, the little princess gracefully walked to the side of the golden lotus chariot and spoke softly. "Longqing's Ting Shui greets my lord." She gracefully bowed, but seeing that the person in the palanquin did not react, she was not angry. Longqing Tingshui thought that she was somewhat smart. She already knew that Gong Dai had a cold personality and did not like to talk to people, but it did not matter, she was very patient. It's Tingshui's fault for making Sir wait. She smiled, and her voice was soft and harmless. If there was really a man sitting in the golden lotus carriage, he would definitely not be able to bear to see her standing below the carriage and talking. Seeing that Gong Yimo still didn't answer, Longqing Tingshui was a little embarrassed. She bit her lip and whispered, "Darren, why don't you speak? Did Tingshui do something wrong?" She was certain that the person inside was Gong Dai, but she definitely did not expect that other than the emperor, the crown prince, and Gong Dai, there was another person who could bring imperial guards and not ordinary palace guards. That person was Gong Yimo. At this time, Gong Yimo waved her hand, and someone lifted the heavy golden curtains, revealing Gong Yimo's astonished little face. "Princess, are you talking to this consort? You kept calling me milord, so this consort thought that you were calling someone else." She smiled craftily, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. That appearance carried a kind of naughty temperament. But when she saw Gong Yimo and heard her call herself this consort, how could Longqing Tingshui not know who this person was? She didn't expect that the person sitting in the palanquin was not the person she was thinking of. It was actually Gong Yimo, her greatest enemy on this trip. She had seen Gong Yimo's portrait before and knew that she was good-looking, but when the real person appeared in front of her, her first reaction was to feel ashamed of her appearance. She really was very good-looking, and this kind of beauty, magnanimity, and calmness, was a stunning thing that she had never seen before. No wonder Gong Dai was bewitched by her, she really was a vixen. Longqing Tingshui forced herself to lower her eyes, she couldn't let the other person sense her hostility. Gong Yimo was amused. She watched as the other person's face changed from joy to an extremely difficult-to-see calm, and it only took about a second. Her face-changing technique was getting more and more interesting, Gong Yimo thought as she propped up her chin. "Little princess, it's getting late. If you don't have anything else, then get on the carriage. Let's go to the palace to chat, okay?" Gong Yimo looked down from above and said softly. Her casual attitude caused the little princess's heart to distort from anger again. But on the surface, she still had a gentle smile. Then many thanks to your country's princess for welcoming me. Gong Yimo casually waved her hand. You're welcome, Ben Gong is just following orders. After saying that, the curtain was lowered, cutting off the little princess's resentful gaze. Why was her attitude so high and mighty when they were both princesses? Wasn't she afraid that she would complain to Dai Yu State's emperor? That's right, she heard that Dai Yu State's emperor favored Gong Yimo, that's why she was so fearless. Longqing Tingxue lowered her head and walked towards her carriage step by step. When she passed by Buji, she gave him a gloomy look. Wasn't it just a princess, and he actually wanted her to pay a visit? Was this person dead? How could she know Gong Yimo's position in the hearts of the men in the world? She could only accept this hidden loss. Set off, a eunuch shouted, and then the imperial guards uniformly escorted Gong Yimo. This scene made Longqing Tingxue's heart extremely unbalanced. In Luyi, everyone doted on her and gave in to her. She had the best food, clothing, and other necessities. But when it came to Luyi, she was compared to Gong Yimo at the first meeting. The 200 sets of dowry behind her were not even in her eyes and ignored. In this way, Gong Yimo looked like a princess who was about to get married, and she was like a concubine who followed behind. Gong Yimo must be doing this on purpose. Knowing that she was going to marry Gong Dai, she purposely took her down a notch. Longqing Tingxue calculated in her heart, and the more she thought about it, the more indignant she felt. She even felt that Gong Yimo asked the imperial guards to accompany her to deliberately make her misunderstand and embarrass herself. Humph. What was this kind of public humiliation? If Gong Yimo only knew a little of this kind of trick, then she would die a terrible death. At this moment, the people on both sides cheered. She lifted the curtain to take a look and realized that Gong Yimo had a very high reputation in the hearts of the people of Dai Yu State. Many people lined the streets to welcome her, as if it was an honor to see her. She had never enjoyed this kind of glory when she was in Luyi. The cold light flashed in Longqing Tingxue's eyes, and then she smiled faintly. A very good reputation, huh? Deeply popular, huh? Enjoy this last period of glory, because when she came, she would snatch away everything Gong Yimo had, one by one. With this thought, she steadily lowered the curtain with a gentle smile on her face, and no one could see any evil intentions. Chapter 296. The arrival of Longqing Tingxue made the palace lively again. The emperor specially set up a banquet to welcome her arrival. Because as long as she married, the cooperation between Dai Yu State and Luyi would be half completed. Even the empress lamented that the palace had been too lively recently. There were princes and princesses. She was so busy worrying about the banquet almost every day. And this palace banquet was also very particular. She didn't know what Gong Dai said to Gong Qing, but he actually didn't insist on Gong Dai marrying Princess Lu Yi. Therefore, today's banquet was to let the princess see the sons of Dai Yu State. Although there weren't many princes of the right age, there were many sons of other nobles and ministers. When Gong Yimo found out about this, she heaved a sigh of relief. As long as the emperor didn't grant a marriage, this little princess might not choose Gong Dai. Before the banquet, the empress smiled and told Longqing Tingxue about this under the emperor's orders. Longqing Tingxue blushed, but a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. What else was there to choose? Wasn't Gong Dai the most suitable prince? Or did the emperor not want her to marry Gong Dai, so he arranged this banquet for her to choose someone else? But no matter how dissatisfied she was, she wouldn't show it. In any case, Gong Dai would definitely appear. If the emperor didn't grant a marriage, she would personally choose a husband. It wasn't a big deal. Thinking of this, she smiled at the Empress and said that she would perform a dance tonight. At that time, if she liked someone, she would hint to the Empress. The Empress smiled and nodded, thinking that Lu Ye's customs were indeed different from Dai State's. As they talked, it was time for the banquet. Because the Emperor had released the news that anyone who came would have a chance to win the favor of Princess Lu Yi, those who were interested were very active. Gong Yimo rubbed her stomach and complained to herself at the palace gate, "There have been too many banquets recently. I feel that my waist is fat." At this time, Gong Dai had unknowingly appeared behind her. The moment they passed, he said, "Are you fat? But to my touch, it still feels very slender." Gong Yimo was shocked. Seeing that there was no one around, she glared fiercely at Gong Dai. "You talk too much." Then, he ran in first. Gong Dai smiled and followed him in. Gong Dai had a lot of things on his mind recently because Kim Yoon still hadn't given him an answer. It must have something to do with what happened that night. But it didn't matter. He would get the contract eventually. It was just a pity that he couldn't see Royal Sister so often. It was really a pity. Halfway through the banquet, just when the atmosphere was at its peak, Princess Lu Yi finally made her appearance. The main event that they had been waiting for had finally arrived. She took off her gorgeous cloak, revealing a red dance dress underneath. This attracted the attention of everyone present, and most of them revealed a covetous look. Long Chang's Ting Shua pursed her lips and smiled, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for setting up this banquet for Ting Shua. Ting Shua has just arrived and has nothing to thank you for. I can only dance to express my sincerity." Gong Qing knew that this little princess had made her appearance now. She must have already chosen her partner. He swept his gaze across the hall. There were more than a dozen unmarried princes, as well as the sons of ministers and nobles. It was reasonable to say that this little princess shouldn't have recognized anyone beforehand, so he didn't know who she would choose as her husband. Since Princess Lu Yi is on the stage, it is everyone's blessing. But we also don't know what the princess likes. So, everyone will take out a beloved object. Later, when the princess finishes her performance, she can take away the object she likes. As an addition, we will also reward you. The emperor's meaning was too clear. He clearly said that whoever the princess liked, she could take away his object as a token of love. Moreover, this little princess was beautiful and seemed to have a good personality. She was also very favored by Lu Yi. Marrying her was really not a loss. Therefore, when the palace servant walked in front of someone holding the red silk, everyone took out their most precious object and placed it on top. Then, the eunuchs announced it, such as so-and-so jade pendant. The little princess stood there smiling the whole time, as if she didn't mind. But she still had to pay attention to a few important people. Especially when the palace servant walked in front of Gong Yimo, she took a second look. Gong Yimo was the only woman in the hall except for the imperial concubines. If she accidentally took their things, what would the emperor do if he thought that she didn't like any of them? So she had to avoid it. Then, she saw Gong Yimo casually pull out a hairpin from her hair and put it on the tray. She suddenly felt indignant. Just how much did she not put her in her eyes? But after Gong Yimo, it was Gong Dai's turn. She looked over expectantly and saw him put a dragon-shaped jade pendant on the tray. Although it was only a quick glance, she still saw that the jade pendant's color was very good. It was obviously not cheap. The little princess lowered her head in relief. She felt that Gong Dai might not be completely uninterested in her. Soon, everyone offered up their most precious things and then waited for the result. When the palace music sounded, the little princess danced Lu Ye's unique fast-paced dance. When she danced, her entire person looked very lively. Those bright eyes and the blush on her face made the single men present very excited. If they could really marry Lu Ye's princess, that would be great. Thinking like this, they all put on their best manners, hoping to be chosen by the other party. After all, the emperor didn't decree a marriage and even held such a banquet. It was clear that he was letting the princess choose herself. They all had a chance. Long Cheng's Ting Shui spun among the dancers like stars surrounding the moon. Her red sleeves fluttered and her dance steps were cheerful. She really gained the favor of many men. So when she stopped, the applause didn't stop. Long Cheng's Ting Shui was slightly panting. The emperor took the lead to praise and smiled mischievously. Let's not talk about my reward first. Come, little princess, take a look at these treasures. Is there one you like? When the emperor said this, the palace servants quickly handed over 3 trays full of treasures. Long Cheng's Ting Shui had a confident smile on her face. No matter how special the other things were, she didn't care and directly went to find the things that Gong Dai took out. Everyone became nervous. Some people even raised their necks to look. The emperor and empress looked at each other and smiled because they knew that as long as Princess Lu Yi chose the things that were put in, then she had the heart to marry that person. Although they didn't want to be too obvious and put all the treasures together, they all knew that as long as the princess had the heart, she would definitely know which one was put in by her sweetheart. Who would she choose? Gong Yimo watched with her chin in her hand. She felt lucky that the emperor didn't decree a marriage and used this method to let the princess choose her husband. However, the situation now was also very dangerous. After all, Gong Dai was so handsome. At this time, she turned her head and found Gong Dai's calm appearance. It was as if he wasn't worried that she would choose him. Gong Yimo couldn't help but feel strange. You say, whose things will she choose? Chapter 297. Who would she choose? Long Ching Ting Shui's gaze swept through the items one by one, a smile on her lips. Her goal was clear, there was only one item. At this moment, her eyes suddenly lit up, and she stretched out her hand. Her action made many people's hearts tighten. They even held their breaths. But her movements suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she was a little panicked. Everyone waited anxiously, wondering what she was going to do. The distance was too far, the emperor couldn't see which item she was going to take. She clearly came out to dance, so she must have chosen. Why did it seem like she was hesitating now? But at this time, Long Ching Ting Shui's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Under her finger was that dragon-shaped jade pendant. But who could tell her, why was there an identical dragon-shaped jade pendant under this jade pendant? Time passed by minute, and the hall became restless. Many people wanted to know who she would choose, but why was she hesitating for so long? Could it be that she didn't like any of them? Even Emperor Gong thought so. In order to let Princess Lu Yi off the stage, he laughed and said, "It doesn't matter if you don't like any of them. I have other rewards." How could she not like any of them? If the emperor held such a banquet again, these people would definitely not be here. Then how could she choose Gong Dai? She gritted her teeth, the next step was to bet on her luck. The 2 jade pendants were exactly the same, she didn't believe that others could tell them apart. So she held the dragon pendant tightly in her hand, and said with a forced smile, "Your Majesty, Ting Shui has chosen." Emperor Gong smiled, "Whose treasure is it?" At this moment, a eunuch on the side stepped forward to take a look. "Your Majesty, this is your dragon pendant." That one sentence was earth-shattering. The Empress was stunned, and then filled with anger. Emperor Gong was stunned, only feeling baffled. All the men present were stunned. They didn't expect such a delicate little girl to like the emperor in his 40s or 50s. They couldn't help but glance at Emperor Gong. Indeed, Emperor Gong was a handsome uncle, but no matter what, he was old enough to be the father of a little princess. Gong Yimo spat out a mouthful of wine. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to them. Gong Dai smiled and handed over the handkerchief. Royal sister, you're too careless. Gong Yimo raised her head and looked into Gong Dai's pitch-black eyes. She suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. She was 100% sure that Gong Dai did it on purpose. He must have known about the Emperor's plan and prepared for it. That was why he could take whatever the Emperor took out. The eunuchs in the palace must have been bribed by him. Even if that piece of land really belonged to Gong Dai, the eunuchs would say that it belonged to the Emperor. He was too two-faced. Gong Yimo felt uncomfortable being stared at by his deep eyes. She quickly sat up straight and watched the show, ignoring him. The Emperor's first thought was, could this be Lu Ye's scheme? But there was no need to sacrifice a princess. But after hearing the eunuch's words, Long Cheng's Ting Shui was the one who was affected the most. Why was it the Emperor's? It was obviously Gong Dai's. At this time, the jade pendant in her hand was burning hot, making her want to throw it away. But she couldn't do that. If she didn't explain it clearly, not only would the Empress see her as a thorn in her side, but the Emperor would also be on guard against her. So even if it was shameful, she had to explain it clearly. Therefore, she took a deep breath. This is His Majesty's. Ting Shui thought. Her eyes immediately turned red, making people guess that there was something else. After all, they were all put together, maybe the princess remembered it wrongly. Only then did Gong Qing feel a little better. He smiled stiffly, so, the princess chose the wrong one. Long Cheng's Ting Shui gritted her teeth and nodded gently. She looked so innocent that even the Empress's hostility towards her lessened a little. After all, if Gong Che didn't have an engagement, she would hope to have Lu Ye's most favored princess as a daughter-in-law. Ting Shui. Ting Shui didn't choose the wrong one. It's just that there are 2 jade pendants. When she said this, the Emperor quickly frowned and looked at Gong Dai, then said to the eunuch, "Bring it up." He looked and found that there was actually another identical jade pendant. This Gong Dai was really getting bolder. Not only did he deliberately make Princess Lu Yi lose face, but he also schemed against him. What did he want to do? Gong Dai. Tell me, what is going on here? The Emperor was obviously angry. No one dared to speak, and Long Cheng's Ting Shui also shut her mouth. She thought very well. If Gong Dai was going to be punished by the Emperor, she would plead for leniency and strive to leave a good impression on him. Gong Dai slightly raised his eyebrows, walked out, and bowed to the Emperor. "Father, why are you so angry?" Gong Cheng was so angry that he threw the jade pendant on the ground. "Did you do it on purpose to confuse Princess Lu Yi? You're clearly bullying people by doing this." Gong Dai coldly looked at the broken jade pendant on the ground. Since he knew about the Emperor's plan, he had been doing this. He deliberately bribed the eunuch to let the Emperor wear this jade pendant today. When it was time to take out the treasure, he would definitely take out this jade pendant if he didn't have anything else on him. He had an identical jade pendant. He also thought that the Emperor would be angry, but what did it matter? He bent down and picked up the broken jade pendant piece by piece and whispered. "Imperial Father just said that we should put in our most beloved treasure, and the origin of this jade pendant, does Imperial Father remember?" It was too long ago, but when Gong Dai mentioned it, Gong Qing suddenly remembered. At that time, he brought people to hunt and encountered a fierce tiger. It was Gong Dai who saved him, and Gong Dai was injured because of it, almost crippling one of his hands. He was moved for a moment. After Gong Dai recovered, he gave him a pair of dragon pendants. Both father and son wore the same jade pendant, which could be considered as a show of favor to him, and it was this jade pendant. He came back to his senses, shocked and regretful. Gong Dai had already stood up. He didn't have any expression, and his words were cold and cheerless, as if he wasn't sad at all. Perhaps Imperial Father has a lot of such jade pendants, but this son only has one. It represents some memories that I don't want to forget. It's this son's most beloved thing. He held the broken jade pendant in his hand and lightly added, but if Imperial Father thinks that I did it on purpose, then just smash it. His words didn't complain, but every word and sentence hit Gong Cheng's heart, making him feel regret and hate himself for being so impulsive just now. Didn't this hurt this child's heart? Gong Dai was a person who kept everything in his heart. He was so calm at this time, but his action of picking up the broken jade pendant showed how sad he was at this time. Chapter 298. Long Cheng's Ting Shui didn't expect that. She didn't even need to use the excuse she had prepared. The enraged emperor was convinced by Gong Ju's words. Because of the memories of the past, he showed a look of pity for Gong Ju. But what should she do? Emperor Gong sighed, "It's my fault. My jade pendant. I'll bestow it to you." Gong Dai glanced at the jade pendant in Long Cheng's Ting Shui's hand and smiled. "No need, Father Emperor. Since the princess took the jade pendant, it belongs to the princess." After saying that, he went straight back to his seat, hiding his merit and fame. Long Cheng's Ting Shui really wanted to cry. At this time, the emperor said, "Since the princess made the wrong choice, it doesn't matter. There are still so many treasures. The princess might as well choose again." When he said this, his heart was filled with guilt. Originally, he had some thoughts and hoped that Long Cheng's Ting Shui would choose Gong Dai. However, Gong Dai was so unwilling that he directly rejected the jade pendant in her hand. Coupled with the guilt of remembering the past, he couldn't help but think that since Gong Dai wasn't willing, then forget it. He couldn't force himself to treat his son sincerely because of an outsider. Long Cheng's Ting Shui felt a great humiliation. Unfortunately, the envoys who came with her did not know what she was thinking. They even thought that the great Yu Emperor was giving them face. After the princess made such a big mistake, he still allowed her to choose one more time. Choosing a female and choosing a male twice was already giving them face. But Long Cheng's Ting Shui was different. The emperor wanted to bestow the jade pendant in her hand to Gong Dai, but Gong Dai directly rejected it. This clearly showed that he had no interest in her and ruthlessly slapped her face. At this time, if she continued to pester endlessly and said that she wanted to choose Gong Dai, then she would really be embarrassed. But now that she had to choose again, how could she be willing? There were so many things on the tray, and the only one that belonged to Gong Dai was smashed by the emperor. But when the others heard that she had to choose again, they raised their heads in anticipation again. However, he didn't expect that the princess standing in the middle of the hall would roll her eyes. She fainted. Emperor Gong was shocked and hurriedly called for the imperial physician. Liu Ye's envoys also ran over. In an instant, the main hall was in chaos. Seeing this, Gong Yimo couldn't help but be impressed. It was really clever. If she didn't want to choose, she could pretend to faint. Not only could she avoid a disaster, she could also make the emperor feel guilty towards her. And she had learned this move. At this time, the banquet could not continue. Gong Dai was also called away by the emperor. Gong Yimo thought about it and decided to go out of the palace to look for Kim Yun. During this period of time, Kim Yun and Gong Dai's cooperation had been unable to come to an agreement. She was actually very anxious. After all, this matter was caused by her, so it was better for her to resolve it. After all, these were two separate matters. How could he mix state affairs with private matters? But just as she was about to leave, Gong Che came over. He looked at Gong Yimo and revealed a gentle smile. Imperial sister, do you have time to go for a walk? His invitation made Gong Yimo somewhat surprised. Recently, Gong Che had been very busy and did not express anything strange to her. This made her more and more believe that Gong Che had really let it go. Thus, her attitude towards him gradually returned to how it was before, without a trace of estrangement. Of course I can. She smiled and walked towards the Imperial Garden with Gong Che. The moon tonight was very bright and faint, with a trace of coldness. Gong Che dismissed all his attendants and walked with Gong Yimo in a beautiful plum garden. The plum blossoms had all bloomed. Looking at the flowers under the moon really had a different artistic conception. Gong Yimo went forward and sniffed. There was a faint fragrance. A beauty looking at the flowers did not know that she was also a beautiful scenery. Especially looking at a beauty under the moon, the more you looked, the more beautiful she was. Gong Che could not help but smile. He really felt that he was very easy to satisfy. As long as he could walk quietly with her, it was already something that he yearned for day and night. When he loved her to the extreme, sometimes he even wished that he could forget her. Because seeing that he could not have her was so painful. But he could not bear to. If he persevered and could have her one day, how could he bear to give up? Seeing that Gong Che was quiet and not saying anything, Gong Yimo turned to look at him and asked in surprise. Crown Prince Gij, didn't you have something to tell me? What is it? Gong Che then gathered his thoughts. He thought of something and could not help but smile. I wanted to tell you that the medicine you gave me is effective. Not only was it effective, but he would recover in a few days. So when he talked about this matter, the deep affection in his eyes seemed to be about to explode, but he held it in. He was too happy. Mo was his lucky star. Because of her, he had everything. Now, even the only problem was solved by her. He really wanted to kiss her and thank her. When Gong Yimo heard this, she was also very surprised. It's effective. When will you recover? She took a few steps closer and looked at him from left to right. That pair of beautiful eyes was brighter than the moon in the sky. Gong Che could not hold back anymore and hugged her. Gong Yimo was shocked, but he hugged her even tighter. Thank you, I'm too happy. I simply don't know how to thank you. He thought of how his mother had worried so much in order to hide his illness. He thought of how he had restrained himself so that it would not be exposed. He never dared to eat spicy food, salty food, angry, or agitated. People looked at him and thought that he was born with a good temper. Who knew that he could not be bad even if he wanted to? This was not enough. He also had to be afraid. Once someone found out, it was very likely that he would be stripped of his position as the crown prince. But now there was no need. He had and his illness was almost cured. He no longer had any worries. His only thought was her. Only she, feeling that Gong Che was really excited, Gong Yimo could not help but think of her previous life. At that time, Gong Che had just recovered. He was also very happy. A man who was almost 30 years old pulled her and jumped around without any care for his image. Those past events. She patted his back. Perhaps in this life, she would not be emotionally involved with him again. But seeing him so happy, it could be considered as fulfilling one of her regrets in her previous life. Because in her previous life, she had always wanted him to be well. She wanted to give the best of everything to him. In the end, she did it, but missed it. Later on, she was betrayed and died. It was not that she did not hate him. But in this life, she had a chance to redeem herself. Why should she not let go of others? It was understandable for people in this world to think for themselves. As long as they did not offend her, she did not have the time to be entangled with the grudges from her previous life. So it was fine as long as other people had a good ending and did not get in her way. Hugging Gong Yimo and seeing her quietly being hugged by him, Gong Che felt that this happiness was even stronger than being cured of his illness. The faint sweet fragrance stimulated every single one of his nerves. His arms were wrapped around her, tightly. His Adam's apple moved. Could he kiss her? Chapter 299. Gong Yimo sighed, Crown Prince Gij, this is all I can do for you. If you are really grateful to me, then in the future, it will be enough for you to become a good emperor who loves his people like his own children. Gong Che hugged her. In fact, he really wanted to tell her that there were still many things she could do for him. You still have yourself. He sniffed her hair and his eyes turned red. If only he was the emperor, then he could openly hug her. It wouldn't be like now where he had to think twice before kissing her. It wouldn't be like now where he didn't even dare to express his feelings. I really want her, she is in my arms, why can't I have her? I am the crown prince. If I become a good emperor in the future, Gong Che's voice was muffled, but his heart was beating very fast. This made Gong Yimo mistakenly think that he was still excited about his illness and didn't think of anything else. If I become a good emperor, will you love me? Just like how I love you. Gong Yimo felt a little strange. Since she hugged him, it was enough to comfort him. Therefore, she patted Gong Che's back, indicating for him to let go. All right, Crown Prince Gij. You will be a good emperor in the future. At night, she couldn't see the changes in Gong Che's eyes. Therefore, Gong Che could boldly look at her passionately and reluctantly let go of her. He had to endure. He had to endure to the extreme. Was already very good to him. He couldn't force her, at least not now. Even if he wanted to force her, it should be when she couldn't escape anymore. The two continued to stroll through the forest and talk. It had to be said that this kind of feeling was very good. Oh right, Crown Prince Gij, Su Miaolan has removed her clothes. Are you going to get married? Gong Che was suddenly asked this question. For a moment, he couldn't remember who Su Miaolan was. After all, his heart couldn't hold anyone else. However, this name also resounded like thunder in his ears, because recently, everyone around him had been urging him. Even his mother almost thought that he was impotent, and sent many women to investigate the situation. But, he really didn't want to get married, and even if he did, he would never touch her. Gong Che looked at Gong Yimo's side profile in a daze. He wanted to keep himself clean, and besides he was not interested in anyone else. But now that Su Miaolan's service had been removed, what should he do to get rid of her? But he was old, and he had no choice but to get married. If only, he was the same age as Gong Dai. Or was he really going to marry her and leave her alone? Gong Yimo had also thought it through. In any case, Su Miaolan wouldn't have the opportunity to do anything to her in this life. If she wanted to get married, then so be it. Although she wouldn't congratulate her, she also wouldn't cause trouble. But seeing that Gong Che was silent, she asked, Brother Crown Prince. Gong Che returned to his senses and patted her head, let's not talk about her. He didn't want to talk about other women in front of Mor. Back then, he said that he wanted to marry her, but it was only a temporary measure. Now that it had been delayed for 3 years, it was a pity that his relationship with Mor still didn't improve. Gong Yimo nodded, and the two chatted about other things until the sky turned dark. Gong Yimo was tired, and directly went to Taiji Palace to rest. Looking at Gong Yimo's departing figure, Gong Che asked himself in his heart. He also didn't want to love her like that, but why did he love her like that? The next day, the weather was gloomy. Early in the morning, someone came to visit her in the palace. Gong Yimo rubbed her eyes. Although she had already washed up, she was still a little sleepy. Looking at a certain someone who came to report to Taiji Palace so early in the morning, although she felt guilty towards him, she was still dispirited and listless. Kim Yoon, why are you here so early? She hadn't seen him for a while, and Kim Yoon had lost a lot of weight. It seemed like he still couldn't get over what happened that day. Gong Yimo sighed inwardly. What was going on? It wasn't easy for brother Crown Prince to let go of her, and now Kim Yoon was here. Kim Yoon's face was exquisite and enchanting, but at this moment, the mole at the corner of his eye that was brimming with tears seemed to be on the verge of falling, and he looked a little sad. Mor, are you really so heartless? I've been in Dayu State for so many days, but you didn't even come to see me once. Gong Yimo's mouth twitched. Why did it feel like she was a heartless person? And she didn't seem to have done anything wrong to Kim Yoon, right? Wasn't it all because of his sudden confession? Otherwise, she would have gone to look for Kim Yoon a few days ago to have a drink and catch up, but now it was so awkward. Kim Yoon, let's put it this way. Although I'm always rude to you, in my heart, I still see you as an older brother. We've depended on each other for so many years, Couldn't you lay your hands on someone else? She wanted to say this half-jokingly, but at this moment, Kim Yoon suddenly laughed. His laugh was so bitter that Gong Yimo couldn't bear to continue speaking. At that moment, she, who was so heartless, actually felt that it was cruel. Do you know that calling me older brother is even more painful than rejecting me? He laughed as his gaze traced her face bit by bit, but the words that came out of his mouth were filled with sarcasm. You say that you see me as an older brother, but how do you treat your younger brother? Would you treat me the same way? Gong Yimo's face turned pale. She wanted to say that she was forced that night, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. If she was so heartless, who could force her? But her expression gave Kim Yoon a glimmer of hope. You want to say that you're not willing? His eyes suddenly lit up. I knew it, I knew you wouldn't be so easily moved. Gong Yimo's lips moved. Was she moved? This question seemed wrong no matter how she answered. Why do you think so? Gong Yimo was a little helpless. Whether she was moved or not, or whether she was willing or not, to put it cruelly, had nothing to do with Kim Yoon. At this moment, Kim Yoon's eyes revealed a trace of a bitter smile. Because, my Mor is the most heartless person. Gong Yimo was stunned. She looked at him with her eyes wide open, as if she didn't understand what he meant. Kim Yoon smiled slightly with a little helplessness. Mor, you're heartless. You're good to others, but you're good to everyone. If you really want to choose a difference from all these good things, perhaps the longer you've known you, the better you treat them. His words made Gong Yimo speechless, but there was a huge wave in her heart. Could it be that what she valued about Gong Dai was the fact that they grew up together? You seem to have feelings, but you're the most heartless. Your heart can hold the sea of stars, but it can't hold a relationship. This is also another reason why I didn't dare to express my feelings back then. You're powerful, very powerful, but when it comes to relationships, you're like a coward. You retreat when you can, hide when you can. I was afraid that you'd leave, so I didn't say it. Chapter 300. Gong Yimo didn't expect that there was such a reason behind it. But was he right? Gong Yimo thought about it carefully and realized that Kim Yoon really knew her well. She was a coward when it came to relationships, but she couldn't say that. She was just afraid of trouble. She was afraid of being betrayed after giving her body and soul. She was afraid of being dragged into relationships and tormented by them. She was afraid of being mentally and physically exhausted. She would rather not have love in this world. Instead of looking for trouble and being entangled in relationships, she could do a lot of things. Besides, was there really love in this world? She sneered. Among those successful people, how many of them were in their 30s or 40s? How could they say, "I love you," to their wedded couples? Good things were kinship. Bad things could be enemies. Thinking of this, Gong Yimo shook her head. Seriously, she was going down a dead end again. Perhaps there was such undying love in this world, but she didn't think that it would befall her. It was like a tempting candy. She might be fine if she didn't take it, but once she took it and opened the candy happily, what if it was poison inside? Who could say for sure that people's hearts were unpredictable? Since you know me so well. Gong Yimo felt that her throat was a little dry. She paused and looked into his eyes calmly and confusedly. Since you know me so well, why are you still here? Why are you still here? Her words were cold and cruel, but it was also the truth. If Kim Yoon knew that she wouldn't be moved and wouldn't fall in love, why did he take this step? Wasn't it better to be like before? Kim Yoon smiled bitterly. Do you still remember what you said to me in the past? Gong Yimo looked up at him. She had said many things to him, but she didn't know which one he was referring to. Kim Yoon's gaze fell elsewhere, revealing his perfect side profile. In the past, no matter what I did, I failed time and time again until I was in despair and didn't have the strength to repeat it again. You would smile and tell me to do it again. Maybe there will be a miracle. Gong Yimo suddenly panicked. At this time, he had already held Gong Yimo's hand on the table. I know it's hard to move you. I also know that you won't be moved by anyone. But what if? What if there is a miracle? If I don't insist, I won't have a chance, so I insist. You can reject me once, 100 or 1,000 times, I just want a chance. Just a chance. I'm not worth it. Gong Emo was frightened and tried to pull her hand back. You are. Jin Yun's eyes were burning. You're worth it. Do you still remember back then? It was you who saved my dignity. I was exchanged for 1,000 horses by my father. It was you who saved me from that disgusting man. Yuri's TSS rebuild, SSSS saved my face. There was a light S, there was a light. There was 8, SSS TSS this, SSS TSS at that time, you used this as. You caught my daggers. At that moment, you actually grabbed my heart and never let go. Gong Yimo suddenly stood up and took a few steps back. She looked at Kim Yoon as if he was some kind of monster. Are you afraid? Are you trying to escape? You took my heart so easily. Why can't you share it with me? He also stood up. It could be said that this was the first time he was so aggressive. But he had no choice. If he didn't force her, she wouldn't face her feelings. He wanted her to see it clearly. See it clearly. So, he walked towards Gong Yimo step by step. Then, he took out a small brocade box from his chest. Gong Yimo remembered this box. On the night when Yuheng was found, she danced for him. At that time, he wanted to take out this box. The box was opened. Inside, there was a ring. Kim Yoon smiled. I don't know what the ring you're talking about looks like. It doesn't seem romantic now. But I want to be with you. I've already missed you once. I won't miss you a second time. Will you marry me? Gong Yimo put her hands behind her back. Her eyes were wide open. She was very scared. She didn't know what to do with this situation. Why did he suddenly propose? What did he mean by already missed me once? Could he not say these things to her? Her head was hurting. Kim Yoon, I think you need to calm down. Maybe in a few years, you'll feel that the things that you find hard to accept now are nothing. Kim Yoon suddenly looked at her with a smile. So you don't know about feelings. But I'm willing to teach you. I must marry you. Seeing that he was walking towards her step by step, Gong Yimo's originally panicked face suddenly sank. There was a trace of fear and anger. Stop. Kim Yoon saw that her face was very pale and hesitated. Stand there and don't move. She closed her eyes and held her forehead. She said quickly, since you said that I don't have a heart and don't have feelings, then I'll add a few more words. I don't want to get married, I don't want to love, I don't want to. I don't want to. She seemed to have been forced to the end. This was the first time she spoke to Kim Yoon in such a resentful tone. She was a little flustered and exasperated, but her voice was trembling towards the end. At this moment, she suddenly raised her head. The coldness in her gaze forced Kim Yoon to take a step back. Waiting for a miracle. There won't be a miracle on me. So don't waste your energy. This was a dead knot that she had formed in her previous life. She could see through everything and didn't even care about hatred. But she still remembered the pain she had suffered. She wouldn't provoke him, all right. Kim Yoon's face turned snow white in an instant. He almost couldn't hold the brocade box in his hand. Gong Yimo suddenly hugged her head and squatted down. Her voice was sobbing, "Can't you just let me go? I don't want it. Don't force me. I don't want it." She shrank back like a hedgehog. Kim Yoon's heart softened. He endured the pain in his heart and squatted down as well, comforting her in a low voice. Okay. Okay. I won't force you. I won't force you. Don't be afraid, okay? It was Kim Yoon's bad luck. First it was Gong Chae, then it was Gong Dai, and now he was interfering. Gong Yimo was forced to do things that she was afraid of time and time again. Last time at the waterside corridor, when she faced Gong Dai, she exploded. This time, it was even more serious. What was wrong with her? Did she have to get married before she could be at peace? Kim Yoon immediately withdrew his deterrence. He was a little nervous as he coaxed her. A trace of pity flashed across his eyes. Actually, there's something I didn't say. You don't have a heart. But that night, your feelings for Gong Dai were actually wavering. If that's the case, then what about me? If it's me, can I? Chapter 301. Snowflakes fluttered in the sky, but it couldn't dampen the enthusiasm of the people. The long-awaited ceremony was finally here. The ceremony was held at the source of the Soaring Dragon River, the sacred place of Daiyu State, the broken stairway to heaven. The broken stairway to heaven was a cliff. The surface was very smooth, as if it had been neatly trimmed. The reason why it was called the stairway to heaven was because the cliff that extended from the ground wasn't vertical. Instead, it was like a giant staircase, with a total of 9 steps. Legend had it that this was the place where the gods ascended to heaven. The 9 steps to heaven were a miracle left behind by the gods. At the bottom of the stairway to heaven was the source of the Soaring Dragon River. Legend had it that when the gods ascended to heaven, they shed tears because they couldn't bear to part with their loved ones. The stairway to heaven was covered with clouds. Legend had it that it led directly to the palace of the goddess. Because the Grand Canal started here, the Grand Canal's conferring ceremony would naturally be held here. Legend had it that the broken stairway to heaven was a goddess. Therefore, every time there was a ceremony, a woman had to preside over it. Gong Yimo was wearing a complicated palace dress. As she ascended the mountain, she lifted the curtain and looked at the sky. It was already afternoon, but visibility wasn't high. Many people were already waiting at the altar of heaven. They folded paper lotuses and threw them down the cliff to pray for their blessings before the conferring ceremony. Soon, it was the new year. Everyone had good wishes and hoped to take advantage of this auspicious day to gain some blessings. Countless officials and nobles had arrived. However, on this day, everything was simple. They all stood beside the altar of heaven and looked at the wooden altar that had been built for almost 400 years. Their expressions were solemn. Speaking of which, this altar was even older than the history of Dai State. The reason why they looked solemn was because the founding empress of the Du Empire, a respectable woman, jumped down from this place. For the next 50 years, the founding emperor did not allow anyone to come here. After he died, this place was reopened. When the emperor arrived with his concubines, everyone knelt down to welcome them. They were all wearing dark clothes and walked towards the altar of heaven with solemn expressions. The emperor was the first to ascend the altar and announced the start of the ceremony. Everyone present bowed their heads and kowtowed. Beside the altar were the officials, followed by the imperial guards, and the outermost circle were the commoners. Today is an auspicious day. Dai State's canals have been completed by offering sacrifices to the heavens here. From now on, the heavens will bless the people, and the weather will be favorable. The officials shouted, and each of them took out a pearl that they had prepared beforehand. They held it up and faced the direction of the emperor. After the emperor, it was the crown prince's turn. The crown prince had contributed greatly to the construction of the canal, so he would be the one to read today's prayer. After he finished reading, it was Gong Yimo's turn. Under Gong Che's arrangement, today's activities were kept simple. Gong Yimo only needed to hold the pearls in her hands, kowtow every 3 steps, and finally climb to the edge of the cliff and throw the pearls in her hands down. Gong Yimo breathed a sigh of relief as this matter was relatively simple. She was surrounded by people. Although the ceremony was simple, it was also solemn. Everyone looked at her seriously because in their hearts, this stairway was like the place closest to the gods. No filth was allowed. Before coming here, not only did she have to bathe and change her clothes, but she also had to abstain from food for 3 days in advance. She couldn't be careless at all. Gong Yimo knelt down. There were people on both sides of the wooden sacrificial altar, including Kim Yoon and Long Ching Ting Shui. In the middle, there was a road paved with white brocade. From afar, it looked like it could really reach the heavens. She bowed, then took 3 steps forward and knelt down again. From the moment she got off the carriage, her feet couldn't be stained by the slightest bit of dust. Before coming here, she soaked in water the whole morning, burned incense, and bathed. She bowed again. At this time, Long Ching Ting Shui's eyes became very resentful. Even though Gong Yimo didn't look directly, she could feel it. Although she had to bow every 3 steps, it was also an honor. Being able to climb the stairway to heaven was an honor above all beliefs. The stairway to heaven's altar was equivalent to Lu Ye's sacred lake. How could she not be jealous? Gong Yimo smiled and bowed again. At this moment, her heart became especially calm. During this period of time, she really didn't like the way she was stuck in the mud. The biting cold wind on the broken stairway to heaven made people sober up. Her eyes and ears were clear, and she could see her appearance clearly again. She shouldn't be a person who was deeply in love. The crown on her head lightly touched the white brocade on the ground. The smooth and cold feeling made people feel refreshed. At this time, the people on the altar had already left and replaced it with a new brocade. It was snow white and covered all the wooden boards below. It felt like there was nothing there originally. She smiled faintly, and finally, she stepped on it. The altar had been built for a long time, so when she stepped on it, there was still a creaking sound. Therefore, she couldn't help but lighten her strength and was about to step on it with her other foot. At this moment, there was a sudden sneer from the crowd. Ridiculous, the stairway to heaven's altar is such a sacred place. You actually let an extremely filthy woman climb up. Gong Yimo's line of sight passed through the crowd and accurately landed on that person. With this look, there was a sense of familiarity. Gong Dai's eyes turned cold. In the next moment, he was ready to let the Imperial Guards kill that person. At this time, Gong Qing hurriedly said, "You can't kill people on the altar." This was an iron law. It was an iron law that the founding emperor left behind. It must be obeyed. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and stared at that person in green. He said in a deep voice, "Drag him away." But that person in green smiled and actually pulled out a sword. The surrounding people were so frightened that they moved aside and made a path for him. "I will leave after I finish what I want to say. Don't force me to kill." Gong Cheng's face was as heavy as water. He was wondering if he should break the law. But he glanced at Gong Yimo. His daughter shouldn't have any weakness that could be used against her. In this moment of hesitation, the person in green revealed a victorious smile and walked step by step in front of the people. "I say, she, the princess of Daiyu State, looks noble and pure, but is dirty on the inside. You're courting death." Gong Che suddenly said, "Imperial Father, are you going to let this person spread lies to mislead the people?" "I'm courting death." The person in green looked at the surrounding people who were curious about his shocking news. There were many people who wanted to see Gong Yimo's miserable state. As long as he added fuel to the fire, there was no need to worry that it wouldn't burn out. "What I'm about to say is true. If there are any lies, may the heavens and earth destroy me." When he said this, the people couldn't help but believe him. This was originally an era of faith. Moreover, they were at a sacred place like the altar. How could he dare to lie? Gong Cheng was still hesitating. At this time, that person had already pointed at Gong Yimo and coldly spoke. His voice was very loud and everyone could hear it clearly. This person, this seemingly dignified woman, is actually having an affair with her own brother behind her back. Tell me, such a woman, is she qualified to enter the heaven-seeking platform? His words caused an uproar. Chapter 302. Gong Yimo's face paled. This day had finally come. She knew very well that if she didn't want people to know, she shouldn't have done it in the first place. Her affair with Gong Dai would be exposed one day, but she didn't expect it to be now. And Gong Dai was already prepared to kill him even if he had to disobey the emperor's order. But he clenched his fists tightly. Not now. Unless he killed everyone here, he had to resolve this matter in front of them. Otherwise, how would Royal Sister deal with herself in the future? He had to think of a foolproof plan. Palace Master Gong laughed loudly, then his face suddenly darkened. Ridiculous. My daughter and my son. Don't think that I don't dare to kill you and punish you for your crime of misleading the public. The man in green was awe-inspiring and fearless. Since I'm already standing here today, I'm not prepared to live anymore. I just can't bear to see this woman accept the praise of the world on one hand, while doing such a shady business on the other. Even if I die, I will expose her true colors. Where's the evidence? Gong Yimo suddenly raised her eyebrows. At this moment, she retracted her foot from the wooden altar and looked at him coldly as she asked. Evidence? That person's eyes flashed. Seeing that the people were listening quietly, his lips curled into a smile. When you were in the cold palace, you and Prince Qi often slept together. Boys and girls don't eat at the same table when they are 7 years old, and you still say that you didn't do it? Gong Yimo frowned deeply. Without waiting for Gong Yimo to speak, that person continued, after leaving the cold palace, your biological brother often came in and out of your bedroom. He stayed for half a day, and every time, he would dismiss the palace servants. Isn't that shady business in the harem? Every time he said something, the faces of the officials turned uglier. Because what he said was the truth. They didn't think so before, but now that he said it, it really made them suspicious. Later, in order to save your lover, you didn't hesitate to fake your death in the West Continent to save him. In the end, you were seriously injured. Who didn't know that it was your biological brother, Qi Wangyi, who took care of you wholeheartedly and even cut his own flesh to save you? Is this kinship? Later on, when King Qi returned to the capital, he locked you up in his estate. There was no ambiguity at all. Who knew what you were doing in your estate every day? Because of you, King Qi has remained unmarried for his entire life. Shut up. Gong Yimou did not expect him to be so disgusting, twisting everything to such an extent. What he said was the truth, and everyone present could not help but overthink. Even the emperor was speechless. Back then, Gong Yimou was so anxious to save Gong Dai. Could it be that she had a private relationship with Gong Dai? Why can't you tell me? The blue-clothed man sneered, only you are allowed to do these dirty things, but no one is allowed to talk about it. Is such a filthy person worthy of ascending the altar? Seeing Gong Yimou's gloomy expression, Gong Dai only wanted to chop this person into pieces. He couldn't take it anymore. He shot a look at the imperial guards below, telling them to surround him and kill him directly. That was the best way. Nonsense. At this moment, Kim Yun suddenly stood up. He looked at the crowd below and sneered, I am the second prince of Yuheng. Back then, when Immerse left the country for 3 years, she was with me. I know best what kind of person she is. She is definitely not the kind of person you are describing. The blue-clothed man snorted, so, she even went to your bed? Are you telling me that for 3 years, a man and a woman together, nothing happened between the two of you? His words made everyone speechless. Their suspicious gazes once again fell on Gong Yimou. Imperial father. Gong Dai's eyes were filled with cold murderous intent. Are you going to let this person slander royal sister? At this moment, he did not want to tolerate it anymore. He wanted to kill this person. But at this moment, Gong Che pulled him back. At this moment, Gong Dai and Gong Yimou were pushed to the teeth of the storm. If Gong Dai did something, then Immerse would really be unable to clean up the mess. At this moment, Emperor Gong glanced at him, then at Kim Yun. He suddenly had a feeling that if he betrothed Immerse to Kim Yun, the rumors would be dispelled. But was all of this really a rumor? Thinking of the words he had heard all these years, his gaze towards Gong Dai became suspicious. As the saying goes, there is no smoke without fire. Seeing that the emperor did not speak, the officials and the commoners all looked pensive. Gong Che also could not sit still. He also pleaded, Imperial father, please investigate clearly. Imperial sister is definitely not that kind of person. The blue-clothed man pointed at Gong Che and said, I almost forgot, there is still the crown prince. He laughed and randomly bit people like a mad dog. Gong Yimou and the crown prince built the canal for 1.5 years. I heard that they ate and lived in the same courtyard. I'm afraid that the crown prince also slept in his own sister's bed. Ridiculous. At this time, Emperor Gong suddenly became angry. The crown prince was the foundation of the country, how could he allow him to slander him? It seemed that today, he really had to break the precepts. If he killed this person, Immerse's reputation would also be ruined, but he had to kill him. Guards! Take this person down. But what surprised people was that this person's martial arts was actually very high. When he pulled out his sword, he took advantage of the panic of the crowd and flew over to seize imperial concubine Long. Emperor Gong could not help but stop and shouted loudly. "Stop! Me, stop!" The blue-clothed man smiled evilly and looked at Gong Yimo with a pair of gloomy eyes. "If you can push that shameless woman down the stairs, I will let this woman go." The blade of the sword left a mark on Long Shangxiang's neck. She was so scared that her face turned pale. She hurriedly shouted, "Your Majesty, save me." At this time, everyone became restless. Many of the people outside saw that the situation was not right and slipped away. But the officials could not leave. They looked at Gong Yimo thoughtfully. Feeling the suspicious and disdainful gazes from all directions, Gong Yimo felt as if she had returned to her previous life where she was besieged on all sides. At that time, she did nothing, but after her secret was exposed, she became a sinner. Everyone blamed her, suspected her, and stood on the opposite side of her. She felt a dull pain in her heart. She raised her head and looked at the emperor, her voice trembling slightly. "Imperial Father, you don't believe me." This time, she also did nothing. Why was she still the one being despised? Emperor Gong opened his mouth but could not speak. This daughter was not his biological daughter after all. If she really knew something, it was not impossible for her to have feelings for Gong Dai. After all, she had always protected Gong Dai. If they really had an affair, this was simply a disgrace to the imperial family. Gong Dai could not help but step forward. With a wave of his hand, all the imperial guards raised their swords. The surrounding officials were so scared that their faces turned pale. "Gong Dai, what are you doing? Are you rebelling?" Someone shouted. Even Emperor Gong's face sank. Looking at Gong Dai step by step to Gong Yimo's side, he actually felt that what that person said was the truth. After all, they were so inseparable. "I am only purging the traitor. This person keeps on slandering others. He is clearly a spy from the enemy country." Chapter 303. The Man in Blue retreats with Long Shangxiang, me. Spy. Prince Qi really knows how to put a hat on people. Then tell me, for whom did you not marry for so many years? At this time, Long Ting Shui suddenly stands up. Her face is red, her eyes are firm, as if she has made a great decision. Don't wrongly accuse Prince Qi. Who said Prince Qi has never married? I. Princess Lu Yi. I want to marry him. Her words make everyone present stunned, but she shyly walks to Gong Dai's side, as if the two of them have privately promised to be together forever. She originally thought that her appearance at this time will win Gong Dai's favor. Perhaps in order to save Gong Yimo's face, he will directly promise to marry her. In this way, even if Gong Yimo escapes the calamity, her reputation will be tarnished, and she will finally get what she wants. But for this matter, she will lose her valiant subordinate. It is a pity, but fortunately, everything is worth it. Kim Yoon looks at her, as if suddenly awakened, and says, "Amour is pure, I believe in her. I am willing to marry her." Ridiculous, she is pure, it is really the biggest joke in the world. The Man in Blue's eyes flash with bone-deep hatred. If she is pure, how can senior brother be beheaded by her sword? Poor him, he just arrived at the little princess's side and heard the news of senior brother's tragic death. This enmity, he must take revenge. The little princess said that she will lose her reputation, but he only wants her dead. If you're really innocent, then explain yourself. Explain why Prince Qi does not marry. Explain why the prince of the neighboring country wants to marry you. Explain why you live in the same courtyard as the crown prince. If you can't prove your innocence, then jump down from the broken stairway. If you die, you will be innocent. The man in blue's reaction is not only out of the little princess's expectation, but also out of everyone's expectations. Gong Dai's eyes flash with anger, coldly says, "Kill him. He can no longer endure. Even if he angers the emperor, so what? Even if this matter is confirmed, so what? At most, he will rebel. At most, he will admit it. But now, he only wants to kill this man. So his mouth shut." "No." Gong Qing hurriedly stopped him. Long Xiangxiang was still in his hands, how could he act rashly? But to his surprise, the imperial army refused to listen to him. He actually attacked the green-clothed man. Long Qingting Shui was scared out of her wits. She wanted to completely destroy Gong Yimo, but she didn't want to destroy Gong Dai. The Imperial Guard was fast, but Gong Yimo was faster. She attacked the man in green, but the man in green quickly retreated with Long Xiangxiang. Not only did they avoid the Imperial Guard, but they also avoided Gong Yimo. At this moment, the green-robed man waved his hand and Long Xiangxiang screamed. Her shoulder was cut open by his sword. Gong Qing was anxious. "Mor. Stop." His words made Gong Yimo stop in her tracks. Once again, she landed on the side of the altar. She turned around and glared coldly at Gong Qing. That gaze could be said to be the first time since the beginning of time. That boundless coldness and deterrence actually forced him, the emperor, to take 3 steps back. At this moment, he forgot about his anger at the imperial army for not listening to him, and also forgot about his suspicion of Gong Yimo. At this moment, there was only fear in his mind. Then, her gaze swept across the crowd and finally landed coldly on Long Qingting Shui. Long Qingting Shui was frightened by Gong Yimo's gaze and quickly hid behind Gong Dai. At this moment, she wanted to grab Gong Dai's hand, but Gong Dai ruthlessly flung her hand away. Gong Yimo's gaze landed on the two of them with a chill. At this moment, everyone stopped. The imperial army didn't know whether to continue or not, and the officials and commoners didn't dare to speak because that murderous aura was so real. Was Gong Yimo really that kind of person? She seemed to be involved with all these men. A fly wouldn't bite a seamless egg. Even if she was clean, how clean could she be? In addition to the past rumors and slanders, people had even more reason to suspect that she had done something dirty. Some people with more imagination were already imagining Gong Yimo's appearance in bed. Such a person really didn't deserve to be a saintess and go to the altar. Jump down. As long as you jump down, I'll immediately release this woman and cut my own throat here. Seeing that this person was so determined to die, the people's hearts were almost one-sided. Gong Qing had a headache, but it was impossible for Gong Yimo to jump down. However, no matter how today's matter was resolved, Mor's reputation would be ruined. Gong Yimo suddenly laughed. "You're saying that I have an affair with Kim Yun, Gong Che, and Gong Dai?" The green-clothed man snorted, shameless. Ever since Gong Yimo killed Sang Xiu, he couldn't wait for her to die. In addition, the little princess often instilled in him some shameless words about Gong Yimo. After a long time, he believed it without a doubt. At this moment, he felt that talking to her was like dirtying himself. Gong Yimo smiled and raised her hand. Her sleeve slipped down, revealing her spotlessly white arm. In this gloomy weather, it was dazzling white. And on that dazzling white arm, there was a vermilion dot of chastity sand, which stung everyone's eyes. Some people with bad intentions were even more suspicious. Was that chastity sand real? Those suspicious gazes made Gong Yimo very uncomfortable, but she didn't seem to feel it at all. She smiled and said to the green-clothed man, "Do you want to know if this is real? Come and see for yourself." The green-clothed man seemed to be possessed. How could Gong Yimo have that chastity sand? It must be fake. It must be. He dragged the half-dead Long Xiangxiang forward. His eyes stared intently at that smear of red. After a while, he actually wanted to reach out and touch it to determine if it was real or fake. He moved closer to Gong Yimo because Gong Yimo didn't have anything in her hands. He was also confident in his martial arts, so he wasn't afraid of her. That chastity sand. It looked real. Just as he frowned and wanted to take a closer look, Gong Yimo curved her lips into a smile. How is Tsang Xiu related to you? The green-clothed man heard this and raised his head. At this moment, a cloud of white powder suddenly flew towards him. He couldn't dodge in time and that powder viciously pierced into his eyes, causing him to subconsciously close his eyes. He had never expected that Gong Yimo would actually crush the pearl in her hand and use it to plot against him. She took this opportunity to grab his sword and pulled Long Xiangxiang out and threw her to one side. The green-clothed man subconsciously retreated. At the moment when he couldn't see anything, Gong Yimo had already rushed forward and tightly grasped his hand. Isn't it fun? You've been playing for so long, it's my turn to play. Her words seemed to have been whispered into his ear, but it caused a chill to run down his spine. Under this provocation, the green-clothed man endured the pain and opened his eyes. Gong Yimo's hand had already fiercely slapped his face. Slap. This slap carried with it a vicious aura, causing half of his face to swell up. It was extremely frightening. This is the first slap. It's your fault for speaking rudely and making me sick. Chapter 304. The man in green was stunned by her slap. He was still retreating and the people behind him hurriedly retreated, revealing the cliff behind them. Slap. Gong Yimo blocked his random attack and slapped his face again. This slap is for your despicable actions. You're not a man. That slap sound made everyone's heart tremble. Their faces also seemed to be in pain. Gong Yimo was angry and the murderous aura around her made many people fearful. It was as if she was killing a chicken to warn the monkeys, making them afraid as well. This time, the azure-clothed man regained his senses. His eyes were wide open. His eyes were red and filled with veins. I'll kill you. He swung his sword at Gong Yimo. As a warrior, he was slapped by a slut in front of everyone. This was an unprecedented humiliation. But even his senior brother was not Gong Yimo's match. How could he be her match? And the angrier he was, the better. Gong Yimo sneered and dodged. In the end, she actually grabbed his sword with her bare hands and slapped him again. Slap. This slap could be said to have completely destroyed the man in green's male self-esteem. The sword in his hand was tightly grasped by Gong Yimo. She directly snatched it away, as if she was not afraid of pain. The blade of the sword was dripping with blood. The man in green was slapped to the ground by Gong Yimo. Injured and humiliated, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Looking at Gong Yimo's eyes, it was as if he could not wait to eat her flesh and drink her blood. Who are you to Zhang Rui? Gong Yimo asked loftily. The man in green almost blurted out, but he thought of something. He covered his face and laughed sinisterly. What Zhang Rui? I don't know him at all. He had to endure. He would not expose that he was Lu Ye's man. Gong Yimo laughed. It seemed that the stimulation was not enough. She threw his sword on the ground. At this moment, her hand was trembling and her palm was a bloody mess. But it didn't matter. She used her trembling hand to pull something off her neck and waved it in front of him. The blood-stained iron chain swayed in front of the green-clothed man. The words hidden rushed on it stung the green-clothed man deeply. These are my spoils of war. Gong Yimo's voice was faint, like a ghost, and it accurately reached his ears. At that time, I slashed his body more than a dozen times, humiliating and torturing him. In the end, I cut off his head with my sword. The green-clothed man raised his head abruptly. At this moment, he had forgotten the pain on his face. His face was tense as he stared at Gong Yimo with trembling skin and flesh. He gritted his blood-stained teeth and finally tore open his collar. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not Lu Ye's man. He didn't have a name tag around his neck. To be able to remove the nameplate that was more important than life, it seemed like he was really determined to die. Gong Yimo smiled and the silver necklace in her hand fell to the ground. The green-clothed man's gaze followed, and in that moment, his eyes flashed with hatred. As a martial artist, their honor could be reflected on their nameplates. And his senior brother, Lu Ye's most powerful martial artist, had a total of 8 engravings on his nameplate. Each engraving represented his honor. But at this moment, it had fallen into the dust and was stained with dust. It didn't have the slightest bit of its former glory. Thinking of this, he couldn't bear to look at it any longer. He stared hatefully at Gong Yimo and a dagger suddenly appeared in his hand. He wanted to commit suicide. He wanted to use his death to forcefully throw the crime of having an affair onto her. She would never be able to wash it away in this lifetime. Gong Yimo. Do you think that by framing me and killing me, you can clear your name? You're a slut. I'm willing to die to prove that I'm not lying. He raised the dagger high and was about to stab himself in the abdomen. But after raising it for a while, it didn't fall. It wasn't Gong Yimo who stopped him. Instead, it was Gong Yimo who calmly raised her foot and fiercely stomped on the nameplate on the ground. The green-clothed man's eyes immediately turned red. Seeing that things were about to go south, Long Cheng's Ting Shui suddenly cried and said to the emperor, "Your Majesty of Dai Yu State. The nameplate represents the honor of our Lu Yi people. Our two countries may have had a misunderstanding in the past, but Gu country's princess trampling on the nameplate is equivalent to trampling on our Lu Yi country's prestige. Although I, Long Cheng's Ting Shui, am a woman, I can't tolerate this. Your Majesty, please uphold justice for Ting Shui." She knelt down with a plop, but her heart was nervous. She knew Zhang Xiu's position in Zhang Jian's heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't have incited a warrior to do such a shady business of slandering others. But if Zhang Jian couldn't take the humiliation and exposed his identity, then Gong Yimo could easily clear her name by accusing him of being a spy. She absolutely wouldn't allow it. Emperor Qing looked at Gong Yimo with some difficulty. At this moment Mo was insulted, so how could she be willing to let it go? His silence made Long Cheng's Ting Shui anxious. Your Majesty, are you trying to cause a conflict between Lu Yi and Dai Yu State? Emperor Cheng's expression became serious. He opened his mouth to stop Gong Yimo, but at this time, Gong Dai stepped forward and said coldly, "Imperial Father, if we allow an unknown person to bully Dai Yu State's princess, that would be the biggest joke in the world." You. Long Cheng's Ting Shui didn't expect that Gong Dai would side with Gong Yimo at this time. He had already committed a serious crime by acting without permission. Wasn't he worried about her at all? When Emperor Qing saw Gong Dai, he also remembered that the imperial guards didn't listen to him and listened to Gong Dai instead. This matter could be big or small, but now wasn't the time to be calculative. Gong Yimo knew that Gong Dai could help her deal with that side, so she didn't care at all. As if she didn't hear Long Cheng's Ting Shui, she exerted force on her feet. The embroidered shoe with a large peony embroidered with gold and silver thread ruthlessly stomped on the nameplate, carrying a sense of humiliation. The nameplate that represented status and glory was trampled under the foot of a woman who was his enemy. This scene made Zhang Jian's eyes bulge and almost bleed. But he still endured. He couldn't expose himself and let others know that he was Lu Ye's man. He couldn't ruin the little princess's plans. So his hand that was holding the dagger trembled, and he wanted to stab it down. Do you know? The person under my foot is the #1 expert in Lu Yi. He's arrogant and conceited, but he listens to a woman's orders and participates in those women's private affairs. His actions are not open and aboveboard at all, not like a man at all. Gong Yimo's mocking voice was like a magic spell that tickled people's nerves, making Cangjin endure again and again. Not only is he conceited, but he also has evil intentions. Who knows what he's thinking when he's determined to protect a woman? It's really disgusting. You're not allowed to insult him. Cangjin finally couldn't endure it anymore. You bitch. I'm going to kill you. He turned the dagger that was about to stab himself towards Gong Yimo. However, Gong Yimo grabbed his hand, leaned close to him, and sneered. You're allowed to slander me, but I'm not allowed to give you a taste of your own medicine. Ha! I'm not only going to say it, I'm going to say it loudly. Cangjin, he's a coward. Chapter 305. Aw aw aw. At that moment, Hidden Sword's body exploded with a shocking murderous aura. He suddenly pounced towards Gong Yimo. He wished that he could perish together with her. Gong Yimo was forced back a few steps by his momentum. Once she got used to it, she quickly counterattacked. Everyone present retreated far away, afraid that they would be implicated. But that green-robed man had such a huge reaction towards Lu Ye's death. This point was enough to make people ponder. Could it be that he was really a spy sent by the neighboring country to slander the princess? This matter was caused by Gong Yimo and could only be resolved by her. At this moment, no one could interfere. Probably only Long Cheng's Ting Shui was anxious. She wished that Hidden Sword could die quickly. In this situation, if he was caught, then he would not be able to clear his name. Did Long Cheng's Ting Shui ask you to do this? Gong Yimo lowered her voice and asked. The cold wind blew on her face, giving people a ruthless and fierce feeling. She was obviously kind, but now, it was as if she had revealed another side, which only represented evil. Hidden Sword panicked and almost lost his grip on the dagger in his hand. After slandering me, you still want to slander the pure and innocent princess? You bitch, you're really disgusting. Pure and innocent. Gong Yimo seemed to have heard the funniest joke. Lu Yi people don't care about chastity. Do you dare to say that you haven't slept in your little princess's bed? Her words deeply provoked Song Rui. Also, if Long Cheng's Ting Shui, who had an affair with her subordinates, was as pure as ice and as pure as jade, then Gong Yimo, who still had her chastity mark, was really as disgusting as Long Cheng's Ting Shui said. At that moment, Hidden Sword had a second of doubt. But Gong Yimo did not give him the chance and took the opportunity to kick him away. The moment he reacted, his hands were firmly holding onto the edge of the cliff. His whole body was suspended in the air. At that moment, his face was filled with horror. Without waiting for him to climb up, Gong Yimo was already standing at the edge of the cliff, blocking all his escape routes. Suicide was one thing, but being forced into a dead end was another. At this moment, he no longer had the momentum he had when he wanted to commit suicide. The wind that blew up from the bottom of the cliff was bone-chilling, making him feel cold all over. His heart felt weak, and the hand that was holding the rock was sweating. If you don't want to die, why don't you jump down? Gong Yimo was standing at the edge of the cliff. Her toes were even sticking out of the cliff. Hidden Sword felt as if a mountain was pressing down on him. He clenched his teeth. His heart was in turmoil, but he couldn't make up his mind. Gong Yimo lightly stepped on the back of his hand that was clinging to the edge of the cliff. Even though she didn't use much strength, the hidden threat of oppression wasn't any worse than her crushing him. You must be Zhang Rui's junior brother. Gong Yimo's earth-shattering words made Hidden Sword unable to hold back his shock and raise his head. Gong Yimo frowned and continued, "Your moves are very similar to his, because he personally taught you. But when he taught you, he definitely didn't teach you what it means to be willing to lose a bet and what it means to be a gentleman. He took advantage of my inconvenience to make a move on me and humiliated me. Then he was killed by me. It's his skill that was inferior. Why do you hate me? Why are you slandering me? Why?" As she spoke, she exerted more strength on her foot. Even Long Ting Shui couldn't stand it anymore. "Princess. How can you humiliate a person like this? Since he wanted to die, why do you still want to humiliate him?" When she said this, her eyes were red, making Gong Yimo seem very cruel. Gong Yimo dug her ears. "Gong Dai, this woman is so annoying. This man is Lu Ye's man, she is also Lu Ye's man. Maybe they are jackalls of the same tribe. Help me shut her up first, then I'll deal with her later." When Gong Dai heard this, he smiled and said, "Yes, royal sister." As he spoke, he glanced around. Immediately, imperial guards came forward and prepared to tie up Long Ting Shui. Because it was Dai Yu State's big day, Lu Ye's envoys didn't follow. Therefore, Long Ting Shui was alone and helpless. The maidservants didn't dare to come forward. Only she panicked and asked the emperor for help. "Your Majesty of Dai Yu State. What do you mean by this?" Ting Shui only sympathized for a moment and didn't mean anything else. "But Princess Gugua slandered me like this and wanted to arrest me. Does Dai Yu State want to start a war with Lu Yi?" Gong Cheng was also taken aback. "Gong Ju. What are you doing? Let go of her." However, Gong Dai was indifferent. He looked coldly at Long Ting Shui being tied up and gagged. He looked in Gong Yimo's direction and smiled. "Father, you are confused. I am only arresting the spy's accomplice for the safety of Dai Yu State. Are you rebelling?" Emperor Gong was really angry. Subconsciously, he wanted Changshi to arrest Gong Dai. At this time, Gong Yimo said faintly, "Father, they said that I had an affair with my brother, so you are suspicious. But I said that this woman is a spy, so I am rebelling." "Ha ha ha." Gong Yimo sneered, then her smile suddenly disappeared. "Gong Dai was only following my orders. I will take responsibility for this matter. Father, please don't interfere." It was obviously the same rebellious words, but Gong Yimo said it in such a sad tone. For no reason, Emperor Gong's anger was suddenly extinguished. He looked at Gong Yimo, then looked at Long Ting Shui who was struggling desperately. Finally, he looked at Gong Dai and said nothing. Gong Dai smiled. Anyway, things had already reached this point. From the moment he attacked the imperial army, he didn't care about anything else. What rebellion was there to be afraid of? But seeing Long Ting Shui tied up, she was scared out of her wits. Her mouth was also gagged, so she could only make muffled sounds. She was a princess of a country. Could it be that the emperor wanted to silence her by killing her? Hidden Sword was angry. What did they want to do to the little princess? Gong Yimo bent down and looked at Hidden Sword who was struggling to hang on the edge of the cliff. She revealed an evil smile. Her smile revealed her white teeth, which made people feel a chill down their spine. "Were you sent by her?" "Pei! You're slandering me." Gong Yimo smiled again. That smile was as scary as it could be. Once she had evil thoughts, her whole person was like an evil demon. Her eyes were full of hostility. "Gong Dai, bring her here." Gong Dai heard this and personally dragged Long Ting Shui to the edge of the cliff. At this time, Hidden Sword's heart was like dead ashes. His hand slightly loosened, as if he wanted to fall, but his left hand was firmly stepped on by Gong Yimo. He couldn't succeed. He couldn't live, he couldn't die. It was almost like that. Seeing that no one helped her, Long Ching Ting Shue was so scared that she cried. She was dragged in front of Gong Yimo. At this time, she looked at Gong Yimo with eyes full of horror, as if she was a terrible monster. Gong Yimo reached out and patted her face. The wind blew her black and red robe, there was an indescribable evil charm. "Do you want to die?" she asked softly. Chapter 306. Long Ching Ting Shue felt that her hand was cold, and because of the cold, her palm was no longer bleeding. However, the cold and sticky blood was still smeared on her face, making her tremble all over. Let her go. Hidden Sword wanted to commit suicide, but at the same time, he looked at his little princess suffering. That feeling was really painful. But Gong Yimo would not be soft at this time. The more painful the enemy was, the more ruthless she would be. "Well, if you admit that you were sent by her, I will let her go, otherwise I will scratch her face, what do you think?" Gong Yimo slowly said. Her palm was sucked. The dagger that fell on the ground was caught in her palm. Seeing this scene, Long Ching Ting Shue let out a cry. How dare she? She is Lu Ye's little princess. Her brother and parents love her so much. How dare they treat her like this? At this time, many ministers could not stand it anymore. Is this okay? They looked at their emperor. At this time, the emperor's expression was not good. Originally, it was a good ceremony, but unexpectedly, it turned into this. He was also angry in his heart, but now, he just endured it. Seeing that no one stopped him, Hidden Sword shouted in disbelief. Are you all dead? She is Lu Ye's princess. In fact, when he said this, people with discerning eyes had already seen it, but they all looked at this scene coldly and did not intervene. At worst, they would kill all of Lu Ye's people here, who would know? Gong Yimo did not give up. She coldly looked at Hidden Sword's swollen face, struggling on the edge of the cliff, and smiled slightly. Have you thought it over? If you don't admit it, then I will do it. With that, she put the dagger on Long Ching Ting Shue's face. The cold touch made Long Ching Ting Shue's body that was still struggling not dare to move. Face is the most important thing for a woman. She was really afraid that Gong Yimo would do it for real. Hidden Sword gritted his teeth. Now that the truth was right in front of him, why did she still want him to admit it? Was she trying to make him unable to meet Lu Yi even if he died? As he thought of this, grief welled up within him. He was prepared to break off his own arm and fall down. He didn't want to endure this humiliation. However, just as that thought flashed through his mind, a sharp pain came from the back of his hand that was being stepped on by Gong Yimo. He had no choice but to lean on the edge of the cliff with both hands as he glared fiercely at Gong Yimo. But at the same time, Gong Yimo turned the dagger in her hand and left a bloody mark on Long Ching Ting Shue's face. No! Long Ching Ting Shue's eyes widened as she struggled desperately. The pain on her face made her, who had never been hurt before, terrified. The blood dripped onto Gong Yimo's hand and dripped down, splashing onto the dust and staining the Hidden Sword's eyes. Gong Yimo! It was the first time that Hidden Sword had called her by her name. His voice was filled with disbelief and anger. How dare you! How dare you! He thought that Gong Yimo only said it to threaten him. She wouldn't dare to do anything to the little princess, unless she really wanted to start a war. However, Gong Yimo's actions directly destroyed his last hope. It made him deeply understand that an enraged Gong Yimo would dare to do anything. Threaten. He was underestimating her too much. A bloodthirsty light flashed in her eyes as she smiled gently, if you commit suicide, I'll push her down. If you don't admit it, I'll cut her face piece by piece. Anyway, you weren't sent by her and you're not Lu Ye's people. You shouldn't feel bad, right? Her voice was calm and even her tone didn't fluctuate. However, each and every word made Long Qingting Shue's body stiffen. She didn't even dare to show her resentment. Were the people of Dai State crazy? It was fine that Gong Dai allowed her to fool around, but why didn't anyone else help her? What she didn't know was that at the coronation ceremony last time, those who dared to go against Gong Yimo were ruthlessly dealt with by Gong Dai. How could they dare to say anything? Moreover, in his heart, Gong Yimo had a firearm in her hands. If this matter was really Lu Ye's conspiracy, he naturally wouldn't be afraid because it was reasonable. However, even if Gong Yimo wronged Long Qingting Shue and the two countries really went to war, he wasn't afraid. This was the reason why no one stopped her when she did such an outrageous thing. Hidden Sword's heart turned cold. What should he do so that the little princess wouldn't be hurt? As long as you admit it. I won't kill her and send her back to the palace in one piece. However, if you don't admit it. Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes and stared at Long Qingting Shue's pale face. Her tone became softer. If you don't admit it, then there's no other way. I'm sure it's her. If you don't admit it, then I'll throw her down to vent the hatred in my heart. Is there no law in Dai State? The servant girl who came with Long Qingting Shue, who was tied up, shouted loudly. She was very scared, but she couldn't back down at this time. Otherwise, if the little princess died, how could they live? You keep saying that it's the princess who did it. Where's the evidence? Gong Yimo's line of sight finally shifted from Ting Shue to the maidservant. With one glance, the maidservant trembled. Evidence. Gong Yimo smiled. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and said faintly. I don't want evidence. I just think it's her. I want to kill her. I want her dead. Her words were simply unreasonable. However, the coldness and murderous intent in her words made many people's faces turn pale. They didn't dare to look at her. After saying that, she was a little impatient. She frowned slightly and said coldly to Hidden Sword, who was sweating profusely and looking extremely embarrassed. Have you thought it through? Do you admit it or not? If you don't admit it, then I'll throw her down with you. She really dared to do that. This knowledge made Long Qingting Shue's heart tremble. At this time, she no longer cared about her image and whimpered at Hidden Sword. However, when she looked at Hidden Sword, her eyes were full of fear and resentment. If he didn't commit suicide, if he wasn't provoked by Gong Yimo, how could so many things have happened? However, now, she couldn't care so much. Maybe if she died, it would bring trouble to Gong Yimo, but she didn't want to die. Gong Yimo smiled and pulled out the cloth from her mouth. Are you going to admit it? Long Qingting Shue looked at her in panic. At this time, she was extremely scared, but she still wanted to play tricks. She cried a pear blossom in the rain. It's me, it's all my fault. Please don't kill me. Gong Yimo, you're confessing under torture. Hidden Sword felt sorry for the little princess and shouted angrily. You mean I wronged her? Her face showed a touch of ridicule. She reached out and grabbed Long Qingting Shue's body and pushed her towards the cliff without hesitation. If that's the case, then just kill her and directly frame her. I'm too lazy to play anymore. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.